My name is Sarah, and I'm 37 years old. I married my husband Alex last year, and we bought a house together. Alex is 10 years younger than me. Honestly, I never thought I would marry someone so much younger. When we first started dating, I thought we'd eventually break up. But before I knew it, we were planning our wedding. Even when he proposed, I asked him if he was really sure about marrying me. But Alex said, "I'll always take care of you, Sarah, so please marry me." I couldn't believe how lucky I was to be with someone so kind. However, our married life wasn't all perfect, and we didn't get a lot of time to ourselves. Alex's mom, Julia, didn't like our marriage at all. She said, "My own son, Alex, is going to leave me, his mother, for that woman." Julia didn't like that I was 10 years older than Alex. I wasn't surprised that she didn't approve, given the age difference. Then Julia gave us a condition for her approval. She told us, "You have to live with me." I thought it was unreasonable, but Julia refused to accept our marriage unless we agreed. So we agreed. At that time, Alex couldn't just ignore his mom. "You know, my mom raised me on her own," he said. I understood that he felt he owed her, since she raised him alone. I was grateful to her for that and wanted to take care of her in return. I couldn't stand in the way of the bond between Alex and his mom, so we decided to live together. I wanted Julia to see us as a normal married couple and approve of our relationship. We moved into the house we had bought, hoping things would get better with Julia. But we were wrong. "Sarah, can't you do the housework properly? What have you learned at your age? This is why I don't like women who are older than Alex." Julia's bullying got worse. Like Alex, I worked long hours, so I didn't have much time to do all the housework. I tried to explain, "I work just like Alex, so I can't do everything perfectly." But she just said, "You always argue with people older than you. You're such a bossy wife." Every time I argued back, it seemed to make her angrier, and the bullying got worse. Alex would step in and say, "Mom, stop talking to Sarah like that." He always defended me. Julia would act surprised and say, "Alex, you never used to be like this. It's all Sarah's fault you're not listening to me." She would cry and glare at me, clearly upset. "This is all your fault. I don't understand why Alex married you," she would say every time. It felt like I was living in a soap opera where the wife is always bullied by her mother-in-law. I guess Julia was upset that her son married someone much older than him, and it seemed like she enjoyed bullying me. Day by day, Julia became more spoiled and out of control. I had taken care of my grandmother before, and I had no experience with taking care of a baby, so I was struggling. "I'm sorry, Sarah," Alex would say. "It's okay. Thank you for always supporting me." I really felt bad for Alex. His own mother was bullying the woman he loved. Alex, who cared about me so much, tried many times to get Julia to move out. But I couldn't agree. I felt sorry for Julia, even though she treated me badly. I thought if I just put up with it, maybe she'd change one day. But Julia's verbal abuse didn't stop. On our first New Year's Day after we got married, we went to a relative's house. Julia, who usually never left the house, was excited to talk to everyone. She always makes excuses saying she's working, but really she doesn't do anything. And she leaves all the housework to me. Can you believe it? If this happened in our day, it wouldn't be acceptable. I don't know what kind of common sense she has, Julia said, bad-mouthing me to everyone. I could hear her talking loudly from the kitchen. One of Alex's relatives, Emily, noticed and said, "Sarah, it seems like you're having a tough time, huh?" "Yes, well, I'm getting by," I replied. "Living with Julia isn't easy, especially with how she's acting," Emily said. "You're right," I said, without thinking. I finally admitted how I was feeling. "Why don't you talk to Susan about it?" Susan is Alex's aunt and Julia's sister. She's older and has always been kind and reliable. But would she even listen to me complaining about her own sister? I thought to myself. "Sarah?" I heard a loud voice echoing through the kitchen. Oh, it's Julia again. She always makes me go get her drinks when we run out. I sighed as I quickly went to get the beer. Julia was in the middle of talking to her relatives and seemed a little drunk. As I brought over a cold bottle of beer and a new glass, Julia grabbed it from me and said, "Sarah, you're really such a clumsy wife, aren't you?" She glared at me. Why would she say that? I thought. As I stood there, Julia poured the beer into the glass of a relative sitting next to her. "Isn't it normal to pour drinks into empty glasses? This is what you always lack, Sarah. You're so useless and poorly raised." Julia's words made everyone around feel uncomfortable, but she didn't care at all. I realized that if I got upset with Julia right now, it would just start a fight, so I decided to play it off and smiled. That's my mother-in-law. She really knows how to handle drinks. I learned so much from you, Julia. I used my usual fake smile. Julia smiled widely, clearly thinking that what she had done was impressive. She seemed satisfied now. Sarah, are you okay? It was Susan, looking at me with concern, noticing how exhausted I looked. I'm so sorry about my sister. She's always so hard to deal with, right? Oh, I know. I tried to deny it, but to be honest, I was so fed up with Julia that I couldn't lie convincingly in front of Susan. Living with Julia is tough, I admitted. It really is, Susan agreed. Julia doesn't seem to like you at all. I sighed and shared my frustration with Susan. Susan listened to everything I said and finally said, "If you ever have problems, you can always talk to me." Her kind words really moved me, as if she were like a real mother to me. Yes, I have a kind ally who will help me when things get really bad. I felt a little better, and that made it easier to get through the rest of the New Year's holiday. Thank you, and I'm really sorry for what happened, Sarah. I'm sorry about all the things my sister has said to you. Oh, it's okay. Julia was drunk, so I tried to tell myself that she just got carried away. But I was being too naive. Julia's verbal abuse didn't stop, and any attempt to argue back made things worse. Alex's relatives like to hold family events, and they usually get together whenever they can. Julia would always force me to go and help out every single time. Alex would tell me that I didn't have to go if I was busy, but Julia would insist, and every time, I end up getting verbally abused by Julia. Sarah, don't get all high and mighty just because you have a job. A wife should always stay behind her husband and quietly support him. You think you're equal to Alex, but he's a better man than you. You don't understand anything, she would say. Julia would publicly humiliate me in front of the relatives again. What's wrong with me working? What's wrong with being at the same level as Alex? Alex tried to warn Julia many times, but I felt so awkward being the center of attention at these lively gatherings. All I could do was sit in silence and listen to Julia's cruel words. Then one day, Julia said something so hurtful that I knew I couldn't live with her anymore. It was during another family gathering, and as usual, Julia was being verbally abusive to make herself feel better. What on earth does Alex see in Sarah? I should have never let him marry her. Julia said while drinking with the relatives. She can't even have kids, so what's the point of them getting married? Don't you think so? She asked in a snarky tone, trying to get others to agree with her. I felt like the air went cold. Alex's hand, holding his drink, began to shake, and I dropped the tray I was holding onto the floor. What did you just say, Mom? Alex asked quietly, trying to hold back his anger. What do you mean? I just said that if she can't have kids, what's the point of your marriage? I mean, isn't it true? A 37-year-old woman is practically giving up on having kids, right? I was against the marriage because of that, but you wouldn't listen to me. It's too late to regret now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Alex and I definitely wanted children. Sure, I was almost 40, so my chances of getting pregnant were slim, but I still wanted his child. I had just started going through fertility treatments, but I hadn't told Julia about it. I knew if I did, she would just criticize me even more. Sarah, let's get this straight once and for all. If you don't want kids, then you should just divorce Alex. He's still young, so he can start over whenever he wants, okay? That's when something inside me broke. The patience I had built up all this time snapped with those words. Kids and divorce. You really hate me, don't you, Julia? Yeah, I do hate you. I hate you so much, Julia said with a smile, looking at me. Okay then, well, if that's how you feel, we're not living together anymore. Could you please leave my house, Julia? What are you talking about? You're crazy. You're joking in front of my relatives, and it's ridiculous. I'm not joking. You can't stay in our house anymore, I said firmly. The atmosphere shifted immediately, and all the relatives quickly stepped back. What are you talking about? Well, if you hate me so much, why are you still living in our house? You have no right to make me leave. Oh yes, I do. This house is mine. It's up to me whether I let you stay or kick you out, Julia. Julia looked completely shocked. Wait a minute, Alex. What is all this about? Julia asked Alex for help. Mom, I've told you so many times, haven't I? Don't treat Sarah like that, Alex said coldly. I told you Sarah built this house on her own, didn't I? Why can't you remember something so simple? Because usually it's the husband who builds the house, right? Julia always believed that it was the husband's job to build a house and provide for the family. Alex sighed and said, I didn't want to move in with you, Mom, but Sarah insisted on having you live with us, so I went along with it. But enough is enough. If you keep making fun of my wife, even if you're my own mother, I won't stand for it. Julia, with tears in her eyes, argued, Excuse me? No way. You're joking, right, Alex? Aren't you on my side? Your side? I'm more like your enemy now, Mom. I can't believe you're my own mother, and you're treating my beloved wife like this. Oh, Alex, why? Julia burst into tears, trying to hold on to Alex, but it was already too late. I'm sorry, but please pack your things by the end of this week, I said. Julia looked at me, defeated. No way. Sarah, please wait. I'm sorry for everything I've done. Let's just live together happily again, okay? She pleaded, acting like nothing had happened. I can't do that. I can't live with someone who doesn't appreciate anything. No, please. I want to continue living with you both. Julia begged. No, please stay away from me and get out of my house as soon as possible. I am the one in charge here, I said with no hesitation. Mom, this is how it is. Get ready to leave. We won't be helping you anymore. Julia heard her son and daughter-in-law demand she leave the house, right in front of everyone. A few people felt sorry for her, but most knew exactly how she had been treating us. Good job, Sarah, said one of the relatives. Thank you, I replied. It was Alex's Aunt Susan who came over next. Actually, this whole idea was mine. We needed to teach my sister a lesson. Sarah, you did a great job. Alex, you need to protect your wife, Susan said. Aunt Susan, thank you for helping me protect Sarah, Alex said. Susan and I had been talking a lot. Whenever I couldn't take Julia's abuse anymore, I would talk to Susan. She always gave me kind support. But won't it cause you trouble, Susan, from now on? I asked. It's okay. Don't worry. I'll be keeping an eye on Julia from now on. You two just focus on your life, she reassured me. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough, I said. We told Julia she had to leave, and Susan was the one who firmly made Julia leave, even though she resisted. You did this to yourself. Think about everything you've said and how you hurt people, Helen said. Susan came to pick up Julia, and that was the last time she was in our home. Apparently, Julia went to Susan several times after that, asking if she could convince us to take her back. But Susan just shouted at her, Enough. Think about how they feel. They don't want anything to do with you anymore. Julia cried like a child and bitterly said, That woman brainwashed my son and took him away from me. After Julia was kicked out, she started living on her own. I don't know where she went, but I don't need to know. We also moved out of our home. Alex had just been transferred for work, and I had also submitted my own transfer request. The house had been built with my parents' inheritance, so there was no mortgage and it was easy to sell. We made a profit from the sale, which made life a little easier. If Julia ever visited our old home, she'd probably feel lonely and hopeless. We knew this, so we chose to part ways. Sarah, I'm home. Welcome home, honey. I greeted Alex at the door, holding my big stomach. I'm excited for our baby. I'm finally going to be a dad. I'm counting on you, sweetie. Soon we'll be parents. Alex is determined to protect me, even if it means cutting ties with his own mother. No matter what happens, we'll get through it as a couple. I'm so glad I married him. I truly believe that with all my heart.
When my parents passed away in a tragic car accident, my world shattered. I was only 24, barely out of university, with no siblings or extended family to lean on. Grief consumed me, and it felt like the ground had been yanked from under my feet. My parents had always been my pillars of strength, and their sudden absence left me adrift in a storm I wasn't prepared for. Amid the darkness, I clung to the one bright spot in my life, my husband, Ravi. We had only been married for a year, and his warmth had been a source of comfort during my parents' illness. When they passed, he promised to stand by me, to be my family when I felt I had none. I believed him. But promises, I would soon learn, were just empty words. Shortly after my parents' funeral, cracks began to show in our marriage. At first, they were subtle, Ravi working late, coming home distant and irritable. He assured me it was just stress from work, but my gut told me something was wrong. Then, his family began visiting our home more frequently, bringing with them a wave of judgment and criticism. "You're too slow with housework," his mother said one afternoon as she inspected the kitchen like a drill sergeant. "And look at these dishes, still wet. You were spoiled in your parents' house, weren't you?" Ravi said nothing. He sat silently in the living room as his mother's sharp words cut into me. I tried to dismiss it as cultural differences at first. After all, Ravi's family had traditional values, and I assumed they were just adjusting to having a modern daughter-in-law. But as the weeks turned into months, their visits turned into stays, and their criticisms turned into demands. Then came the bombshell. One evening, Ravi came home late as usual, his face clouded with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We need to talk," he said, avoiding my gaze. My heart sank. "What is it?" He hesitated for a moment before blurting out, "I think we should take a break. I need some space to figure things out." It felt like a knife to the chest. "A break?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We're married, Ravi. What does that even mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he packed a bag and left that night, leaving me alone in the house. The next morning, his family arrived with their suitcases. "We're moving in," his mother announced as if she owned the place. "Ravi told us everything. We'll help you adjust while he sorts himself out." Adjust? What was I adjusting to? My husband abandoning me? But I didn't argue. I was too emotionally drained, too lost in my grief and confusion to fight back. It didn't take long for their true intentions to surface. Ravi's mother and father treated me like their personal maid. I cooked, cleaned, and catered to their every whim while they criticized everything I did. "You call this tea?" his father scoffed one morning, shoving the cup away. "Even a child could do better." At first, I tried to appease them, thinking they might soften if I showed kindness, but their demands only grew. Soon, I was waking up at dawn to prepare their breakfast, spending the day cleaning, and staying up late to iron their clothes. I felt like a shadow of my former self, a servant in my own home, with no one to turn to. My friends drifted away as I withdrew into isolation, too ashamed to tell them what was happening. And Ravi? He stopped answering my calls altogether. One day, while I was scrubbing the kitchen floor, Ravi's mother loomed over me with a smirk. "You should be grateful we're here," she said. "Without us, you'd have nothing." Her words echoed in my mind long after she walked away. Nothing, was that what my life had become? Still, I held on to a sliver of hope that Ravi would return and things would go back to the way they were. But deep down, I knew the truth. The man I had married was gone, and the family I had married into saw me as nothing more than a burden. The days blurred into weeks, and the weight of their cruelty began to suffocate me. But as I lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, I made a silent promise to myself: I wouldn't let them break me. Little did I know, the turning point in my life was just around the corner. As the weeks stretched into months, I fell into a routine that left me both physically and emotionally drained. My days revolved around fulfilling endless demands, each one more demeaning than the last. It wasn't just the housework. My in-laws seemed to find pleasure in reminding me of my place in the family. "You're lucky Ravi married you," his mother would sneer as I set the table for dinner. "What do you even bring to this family? You're useless without him." I wanted to fight back, to shout that I wasn't useless, but I was too worn down. They had taken everything from me: my confidence, my home, my sense of self. One evening, as I was folding laundry in the corner of the living room, my father-in-law walked in, speaking on the phone. His voice was unusually enthusiastic. "Of course, we'd be honored to have you for dinner, sir," he said, bowing his head slightly as if the person on the other end could see him. "It's the least we can do to show our gratitude for everything you've done for the company." When he hung up, he turned to me with a sharp glare. Dinner needs to be perfect tomorrow night. My boss is coming over, and if you embarrass me, you'll regret it." I nodded silently, suppressing the urge to snap back. The next day was a whirlwind of preparations. I was up before dawn, scrubbing every corner of the house, shopping for the finest ingredients, and cooking a feast fit for royalty. My hands ached, my back screamed in protest, but I didn't stop, not because I cared about impressing my father-in-law's boss, but because I needed to prove to myself that I was capable of more than they believed. By the time the doorbell rang that evening, I was exhausted but proud of the spread I had prepared. My in-laws had dressed up as though they were hosting a state dinner, and I was instructed to stay in the kitchen, out of sight. "Just bring the food out when we call for it," my mother-in-law hissed, shooing me away. I stood in the kitchen, my heart pounding as I heard the door open. My father-in-law's booming voice filled the air as he greeted his boss, a man he clearly revered. "Welcome, sir, please, come in. It's an honor to have you here." Curiosity got the better of me. and I peeked through the doorway. The man standing in the foyer was tall, with a commanding presence that made the room seem smaller. His suit was impeccable, and his expression was one of quiet confidence, but as his eyes scanned the room, they landed on me, and froze. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, but then he spoke, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Sana, is that you?" My breath caught in my throat. How did he know my name? Before I could respond, my father-in-law stepped in, laughing nervously. "Oh, don't mind her, sir, she's just the help." The man's eyes narrowed, and he turned to face my father-in-law with an intensity that made the room fall silent. "The help?" he repeated, his tone icy. "Do you have any idea who she is?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Who I was? What was he talking about? My father-in-law stammered, clearly caught off guard. I don't understand, sir, she's my daughter-in-law." "But," the man cut him off, his gaze never leaving mine. "Sana, it's me, don't you recognize me?" I stared at him, my mind racing. There was something familiar about him, but I couldn't place it. Then, like a floodgate opening, the memories came rushing back. "Mr. Sharma," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years. "Yes, your father and I worked together for years. He was my closest friend." The room seemed to spin as the weight of his words sank in. This man, this powerful, imposing figure, was my late father's best friend, and now, he was my father-in-law's boss. The silence in the room was suffocating. My in-laws exchanged nervous glances, clearly caught off guard by the revelation. I, too, was struggling to process what Mr. Sharma had just said. My father's best friend? Why had my father never mentioned him? And if he was so close to my family, why had he disappeared from our lives? Before I could ask, Mr. Sharma turned to my father-in-law, his expression cold and unforgiving. "You've been treating her like a servant?" he asked, his voice low but seething with anger. My father-in-law stammered, "And no, sir, it's not like that. She helps out." "Helps out?" Mr. Sharma cut him off, his voice rising. "I saw how she was hidden away in the kitchen. Don't try to lie to me." He turned back to me, his gaze softening. "Sana, you don't belong here. Come with me." The words hit me like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. For the first time in years, someone was standing up for me, seeing my worth, but before I could answer, my mother-in-law stepped in. "She's our daughter-in-law," she snapped, her voice trembling with both anger and fear. "She belongs here with her husband." Mr. Sharma raised an eyebrow. "And where is her husband? Why isn't he here, supporting her?" The question cut through the room like a knife. Ravi wasn't here, he was never here. My in-laws had no answer, and their silence was damning. Finally, I found my voice. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Sharma," I said, trying to steady my shaking hands, "but I can't just leave." He frowned, clearly not satisfied with my answer. "You don't have to live like this, Sana. Your father would never have wanted this for you." His words brought tears to my eyes. My father, the man who had always believed in me, who had given me the strength to dream big. What would he think if he saw me now? But the chains of obligation were too strong. I couldn't just walk away, not yet. "Thank you," I whispered, "but I need time." Mr. Sharma didn't argue further, but the fire in his eyes told me he wasn't going to let this go. He stayed for dinner, though the atmosphere was tense. My in-laws fawned over him, desperately trying to win back his favor, but he remained distant, his attention mostly focused on me. As he was leaving, he handed me a business card. "If you ever need anything at all, call me," he said firmly. I nodded, tucking the card into my pocket. The next few days were unbearable. My in-laws were furious with me, blaming me for embarrassing them in front of Mr. Sharma. They doubled down on their mistreatment, giving me even more chores and berating me at every opportunity. But something had changed in me. Mr. Sharma's words lingered in my mind, igniting a spark of hope I hadn't felt in years. I began to dream of a life beyond this house, beyond this toxic environment. One evening, while cleaning my husband's study, I found a pile of unpaid bills hidden in his desk drawer. My heart sank as I realized the depth of our financial troubles. No wonder my in-laws clung to Mr. Sharma's goodwill, they were drowning in debt. That night, as I lay awake, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this be my life. I didn't know how, but I was going to find a way out. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, but the tension in the house was palpable. The night before, I had overheard my father-in-law on the phone with Mr. Sharma. He was desperate, pleading for some sort of favor. He's our last hope, I heard him mutter to my mother-in-law afterward. If he pulls out his investments, we'll lose everything. They were right to worry. Ravi had racked up enormous debts, much of it from failed business ventures he'd kept hidden. And now, Mr. Sharma, perhaps the only person who could save them, was squarely on my side. That realization gave me strength. I wasn't just some helpless woman trapped in their web of control. I had a voice, and for the first time in years, I was ready to use it. The next day, Mr. Sharma called me directly. I've thought about what you said, Sana, he began. I won't pressure you to leave your in-laws, but I want you to come work for me. You're brilliant and capable, don't let them convince you otherwise. His words filled me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years, but the idea of working outside the house terrified me. My in-laws had always discouraged me, telling me I wasn't smart enough or educated enough. I don't know, I murmured. You don't have to decide now, he said gently, but remember, this is your life. You deserve to live it on your own terms. That evening, I finally confronted my in-laws. I walked into the living room, clutching the business card Mr. Sharma had given me. My hands were shaking, but my voice was firm. I've decided to take Mr. Sharma's offer, I announced. My mother-in-law's face turned red with fury. You will do no such thing, she spat. What will people say if our daughter-in-law goes to work like some common woman? I met her gaze, unflinching. What people think doesn't matter to me anymore. My father-in-law tried a different tactic, his tone manipulative. Sana, think about the family. If you leave, how will we manage? We're on the verge of losing everything. Maybe you should have thought about that before treating me like a servant. I shot back, my voice rising. Their protests continued, but I didn't back down. For the first time in years, I felt a surge of confidence. I wasn't going to let their fear and control dictate my life any longer. The next morning, I packed my things. My in-laws hurled insults as I walked out the door, but I didn't care. For the first time since my parents' death, I felt free. Mr. Sharma met me outside his office building. He had arranged everything, a place for me to stay, a job that suited my skills, and even a plan to help me reclaim the confidence I had lost. You're going to do great things, Sana, he said, smiling warmly. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed. I threw myself into my work, discovering talents I never knew I had. Mr. Sharma became not just a mentor, but a father figure, reminding me of the love and support my own father had once given me. As for my in-laws, their world began to crumble. Without my unpaid labor, their household fell into chaos, and when Ravi returned, expecting to pick up where he left off, he found a very different woman waiting for him. You're too late, I told him, my voice steady. I'm not the same person you left behind. His pleas fell on deaf ears. For once, I wasn't looking back. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, gazing at the city lights. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. Mr. Sharma's voice echoed in my mind. This is your life. You deserve to live it on your own terms. And that's exactly what I intended to do.
I couldn't bear the thought of being trapped with a man who looked at my pregnant belly with such disdain, as though the very sight of me at 9 months filled him with revulsion. The cruel smile he wore only added to the bitterness. He seemed to relish this moment as if anticipating it all along. Not wanting to endure another second of his disdain, I quickly went to my room, retrieved a set of papers, and thrust them into his hands. Divorce papers, I said curtly. Brian's face twisted in shock. What the hell is this? Out of nowhere? I met his anger with a steely gaze. This was your idea, Brian. Now sign them. I'll be filing them first thing tomorrow. My voice didn't waver, even as his face flushed with fury. You'll regret this, I added, my resolve unwavering. Watch closely, because you'll see what it's like to be treated the way you've treated me. Let me introduce myself. My name is Linda, a 27-year-old former housewife. 3 years ago, I worked at a mobile company where I met Brian, my boss at the time. Back then, I was 25, eager to learn and grateful for Brian's guidance as a newcomer to the job. It didn't take long for our professional relationship to evolve into friendship. Soon, dinner outings turned into dates, and eventually he asked me out. I was thrilled. I had never dated anyone before. It's a little embarrassing to admit, but I was more captivated by cartoon characters than real men. Yet seeing my friends marry one by one, I felt pressured to find my own partner. When Brian entered my life, I secretly promised myself he'd be my first and only love. We married a year later, and I couldn't have been happier. Brian was handsome, popular, and the envy of many female coworkers. I felt proud to be his wife as colleagues congratulated us. Their words of admiration made me feel like I had achieved something special. I was blissfully unaware of what lay ahead. The day after our marriage registration, Brian dropped a bombshell. "You're married to me now, so you'll quit your job, right?" he said nonchalantly. I stared at him in disbelief. "I've already informed them," he added with unnerving finality. "What? But you never mentioned this before," I protested, caught off guard. Brian's stern expression silenced me. "Starting tomorrow, you won't need to go to work. I'll handle the handover." His words were like a guillotine slicing through the life I'd built. The decision had been made without me. Brian's role as my former boss made it even harder to argue. Reluctantly, I quit my job without saying proper goodbyes, determined to make our marriage work. At home, I threw myself into household chores, preparing Brian's favorite meals and trying to meet his expectations. Yet, no matter how hard I worked, he never acknowledged my efforts. I craved even a single word of appreciation, but none came. Without a personal income, I was completely reliant on him, and our relationship started to feel less like a marriage and more like that of an employer and his housemaid. Things took a turn for the worse when I fell ill one day. Exhausted and feverish, I stayed in bed, promising myself I'd catch up on the chores later. Brian stormed into the bedroom, furious. "What are you doing lying there? Get up and make some food," he barked, yanking the blanket off me. "I'm not feeling well," I murmured, hoping for compassion. "Could you handle things yourself today?" His response chilled me to the bone. "Pathetic. You don't work, and now you're lying around because of a little cold." Tears blurred my vision as I forced myself out of bed. I couldn't believe this was the same man I had fallen in love with. Overwhelmed, I completed the housework, tears streaming down my face. Several days later, I realized I'd missed my period. A pregnancy test confirmed it. I was expecting. Overjoyed, I cried tears of happiness, eager to share the news with Brian. But when he came home late one night, the smell of alcohol on his breath, my excitement dimmed. "I have something important to tell you," I began hesitantly. "I haven't seen a doctor yet, but I think I'm pregnant." Brian's expression darkened instantly. "Pregnant? What the hell have you done?" His harsh tone cut me to the core. "I don't want a child. If you're going to have it, you'll be raising it alone," he spat before storming off to the bathroom. I stood there stunned. This wasn't the life I had dreamed of. This wasn't the man I thought I had married. I couldn't understand why Brian would say such cruel and irresponsible things about our baby. Moments earlier, I'd been filled with joy at the thought of becoming a mother. But his words shattered that happiness, leaving me in a pit of sorrow. Why would he react like this? He had never mentioned not wanting children before. We hadn't even been using contraception, so I'd naturally assumed he wanted kids too. As I ironed Brian's jacket and prepared to take his shirt to the wash, a wave of sadness overwhelmed me. Then something unexpected happened. A small piece of paper fell from his dress shirt pocket. I picked it up absent-mindedly, thinking it might be a receipt from his outing that night. I almost threw it away, but something caught my eye. The name on the receipt made my heart stop. A motel. My hands trembled as I stared at the incriminating slip of paper, confirming what I didn't want to believe. It was indeed a receipt from a motel. The shock hit me like a physical blow. Why would Brian go to a motel? Isn't marriage supposed to be a sacred bond between two people who love each other? We'd only been married for a little over a year. How could this happen? I was no stranger to romantic fantasies, having spent years dreaming of perfect love rather than experiencing real relationships. But now, faced with this harsh reality, I struggled to accept what was unfolding before me. The possibility that Brian was cheating began to make horrifying sense. Had he been using me from the start? Was he in love with someone else while I played the role of a convenient housemaid? Was this why he reacted so coldly to my pregnancy? These doubts swirled in my mind, and I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that there was more to Brian's behavior than met the eye. As I grappled with these thoughts, nausea swept over me, not just from morning sickness, but from the realization that my husband might have betrayed me. Perhaps his insistence that I quit my job had a sinister purpose. Maybe his mistress worked there, and he needed me out of the way. Everything seemed to click into place, and my mind blurred the lines between reality and suspicion. But the heartless words Brian had hurled at me when he learned of my pregnancy were undeniable. That day, I resolved to uncover the truth. From then on, I observed Brian's behavior with new eyes. His coldness was impossible to ignore. It was as if he resented me for becoming pregnant. Despite knowing how sick I felt, he would eat smelly foods near me, criticize my housework, and force me to redo tasks. My pregnant body endured his cruelty while my heart grew heavier by the day. But I didn't let it deter me. I began investigating his infidelity. Brian guarded his phone fiercely, never parting with it, even taking it to the bathroom, making it nearly impossible to check. I searched his pockets, hoping for more receipts or clues, but my efforts were fruitless. I even considered hiring a private investigator, but without any personal income, I couldn't afford such a step. Just when I felt trapped in my search for answers, an unexpected lifeline arrived. One day, my phone rang. It was my father. "Dad?" I said, surprised. His busy schedule rarely allowed for casual calls. "Hi, Linda. How are you?" he asked warmly. "Everything's fine," I lied. "Is something wrong? Aren't you busy with work?" "My employees are handling things well, so I'm taking it easy," he replied. My father, the CEO of a company in England, had always been a workaholic. His call was unexpected. "What's going on?" I asked, curious. Then came the shocking revelation. He told me something that made my world tilt. "Is that true?" I asked, struggling to believe what I was hearing. "Yes," he said firmly. "I wouldn't lie to you. Trust me on this." The pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Though initially stunned, I felt a strange sense of relief. "Thank you, Dad. I'll handle it from here," I said, my voice steady with newfound resolve. The truth emboldened me, but it also reignited my anger. As the months passed, Brian's behavior remained distant and cold. His disdain for me and our unborn child never wavered, and each interaction deepened my hatred for him. At 9 months pregnant, I was always cautious around Brian, living in constant apprehension. One evening, I served dinner as usual, hoping to avoid any confrontation. But as we sat at the table, Brian suddenly slammed his fork down. "What is this? It's tasteless," he exclaimed, throwing the plate of food onto the floor. I froze, baffled by his outburst. Anger began to well up inside me as I looked at the discarded meal I had painstakingly prepared. "I've been meaning to say this," Brian continued, his tone laced with contempt. "Your cooking has been terrible lately." Tears stunned my eyes, but I held them back. Since becoming pregnant, I had deliberately used less seasoning to ensure healthier meals for our baby. This was only temporary, and he could easily have added salt to his portion if he wanted. But instead, he chose to humiliate me. Why? Why did he have to treat me like this? I was about to respond to Brian's harsh words when he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "You're a woman with a belly like a monster. You'll have to raise this kid on your own." His cruel smile sent a chill down my spine. Though I had always feared this day might come, I had clung to a sliver of hope for a better outcome. Without hesitation, I went to my room, grabbed a document, and returned to him. "Here are the divorce papers," I said, thrusting the papers in front of him. Brian's face twisted in shock as he stammered, "What the hell? What's this all of a sudden?" "It was your idea," I replied firmly. "Now sign them. I'll be submitting them tomorrow." I had been contemplating divorce ever since I started suspecting Brian's infidelity, but with a baby on the way, I hadn't been sure I could support myself. Now, with a new plan in mind, my resolve was unshakable. My determination seemed to provoke him. His face flushed red with anger as he snarled, "Just watch. I'll make you regret this. Do you think you can survive without me? You've got a baby to take care of. You'll regret it." Unfazed, I held my ground. "I'll be fine. Don't worry about me," I said calmly. Irritated by my confidence, Brian snatched the papers and begrudgingly began to fill them out. "Here. If this is what you wanted, take it," he spat. "Thank you," I replied, my tone steady. Brian likely didn't believe I'd actually submit the papers, but the next day, I did just that and left the house. I moved to my parents' home, where my father, recently returned from England, had suggested I stay. It was the right decision. I was fed up of my life with Brian, and my father's support was invaluable. That day, Brian called me 5 times. I ignored every call. Eventually, he stopped trying, and it became painfully clear how little I meant to him. He was probably content with his mistress and might even remarry soon. I resolved to move on from him entirely. 5 months later, I gave birth to a healthy baby and settled into a peaceful life with my parents. Parenthood brought me joy, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly content. Then Brian called again. At first, I ignored his persistent attempts to reach me, but after several calls, I finally picked up, weary of his intrusion. "What do you want now?" I asked, my tone flat. "Hey, what's going on? Why were you on that show? And since when are you the daughter of a CEO with millions of dollars?" Brian's voice was a mix of surprise and anger. Unbeknownst to me, Brian had seen a TV show that aired after I moved back home. The program, which featured my family, highlighted my father's role as the CEO of a global tech company and estimated our family's wealth at $20 million. I hadn't anticipated Brian watching it, but TV has a way of reaching unexpected audiences. "Oh, by the way," I said nonchalantly, "I didn't tell you about my $38 million inheritance. That's why I was able to divorce you." Brian was furious. "What? That's absurd. Why didn't you tell me before? Half of that is mine, right? Give me the money now." I laughed coldly. Just as I thought. After seeing the show, all you care about is money. Gifts from parents aren't included in the property split. And don't forget your own wrongdoings, Brian. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice tinged with unease. "I'm tired of your antics," I said, my patience wearing thin. "You cheated on me, didn't you? With your new wife, your junior from work. You started dating her even before we were married." Brian was clearly shocked. He hadn't expected me to know the truth. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" I continued. "My father has connections everywhere, including in your company. I've known for a long time." I paused before delivering my final blow. "By the way, I'll be demanding child support." Brian's anger turned to denial. "Stop kidding. Why should I pay child support? You got pregnant on your own and slacked off on housework. It's all your fault." I couldn't believe I had once loved someone so devoid of common sense. Leaving him was the best decision I had ever made. "Brian," I said with a mix of anger and exhaustion, "do you even hear yourself? I'll have my lawyer handle child support. Never call me again, and you'll never see the child. Goodbye." I hung up and blocked his number, feeling a wave of relief. It was finally over. Later, I learned from a former colleague of his that Brian was struggling. His new wife was a reckless spender, and he had plunged into debt trying to keep up with her lifestyle. He had hoped to get a share of my inheritance to ease his burdens, but his plan failed miserably. While Brian wrestled with the consequences of his actions, I thrived. My father offered me a position in his company, promising to pass it down to me one day. I embraced the opportunity, ready to build a future for myself and my child. After all, I am my hardworking father's daughter. The casino chips clattered against the table as Mark tossed them down, his wedding ring glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. I watched from across the room, my heart pounding but my face carefully neutral. He hadn't noticed me yet. He never noticed much these days, too focused on the promise of his next big win. My name is Diana Mitchell, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life. A beautiful home in Boston's suburbs, a successful career as a financial advisor, and what I believed was a stable, loving marriage. Mark and I had been together for 15 years, building what I thought was our dream life together. He handled our joint finances while I focused on my clients, trusting him completely with our future. That trust shattered the day I found the letter from our bank. It had been a normal Tuesday morning. I was sorting through the mail before heading to work when I saw the envelope marked Urgente Sicuramente Nota C. My hands trembled as I opened it, scanning the contents with growing horror. Our joint account was overdrawn by $47,000. But that was impossible. We had over $2 million in savings. I called the bank immediately, my professional composure cracking as I learned the truth. Our accounts had been systematically drained over the past 3 years. Investment accounts liquidated. Credit cards maxed out. Home equity line of credit nearly exhausted. "Mrs. Mitchell," the bank representative said gently, "there have been regular large withdrawals, all authorized with your joint account credentials. Most of them were processed at ATMs inside in core Boston Harbor Casino." The room spun as pieces started falling into place. Mark's late nights at work. The mysterious business trips. The way he'd become defensive whenever I brought up our finances, insisting everything was fine and I should trust him to handle it. That evening, I confronted him in his home office. Spreadsheets and bank statements covered his desk like evidence at a crime scene. "What is this?" I demanded, holding up the bank letter. "Where is our money, Mark?" He looked up, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A mix of desperation and detachment that chilled me to my core. "It's fine," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "I've got a system worked out. A few more weeks and I'll win it all back." "You worry too much, Diana." "Win it back." My voice cracked. "How much have you lost?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Look, the market's been tough. I had to make some moves to cover our positions. But I found this great opportunity." "How much, Mark?" He muttered something under his breath. "What was that?" 2.3 million, he said finally, give or take. The room tilted dangerously. Our entire retirement fund. The money we'd spent 15 years building. Gone. "But that's not all," I pressed, my voice eerily calm. "Is it?" He shifted uncomfortably. "There might be some other obligations." "How much debt are we in?" "About 800,000. He said it like he was discussing the weather. "But like I said, I've got a system. This guy at the casino showed me a foolproof way to—" I cut him off. "Stop. Just stop." I walked out of his office in a daze, my mind racing. 15 years of marriage, of trust, of building a life together. All of it gambled away without a second thought. I felt sick, but underneath the nausea was something else. Something harder and colder that had been building for months as I'd watched our marriage slowly unravel. That night, I lay awake in our bed, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me. He could sleep soundly, unburdened by the weight of his betrayal. But I was wide awake, my mind crystallizing around a single thought. I had to protect myself. The next morning, I went to work as usual, but instead of meeting clients, I spent the day making calls. First to a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague, then to a forensic accountant, finally to a private investigator. "Document everything," my attorney advised. "Bank statements, credit card bills, casino receipts, anything that shows the extent of his gambling. And don't let him know you're preparing to leave. Men like this can become desperate when cornered." For the next 3 months, I played the perfect wife. I smiled and nodded when Mark talked about his system. I pretended not to notice when he came home at 3 a.m. reeking of cigarettes and desperation. I even acted concerned when he asked to borrow money from my personal account for a sure thing. But while he was losing himself in the neon glow of the casino, I was building my case. The private investigator tracked his movements, documenting every visit to the casino, every withdrawal, every loss. The forensic accountant pieced together the extent of his addiction, uncovering accounts I hadn't even known existed. The evidence was damning. Mark hadn't just gambled away our savings, he'd taken out loans in my name. Forged my signature on documents, even mortgaged our house without my knowledge or consent. "This is criminal behavior," my attorney said, reviewing the files. "We can pursue charges if you want." I considered it, but revenge wasn't my goal. I just wanted out, and I wanted to salvage whatever I could from the wreckage of our life together. So I kept playing my part, all while methodically preparing for my escape. I opened new accounts at different banks, had my paychecks redirected, gathered important documents and irreplaceable family mementos, secured a small apartment across town under a different name. Mark noticed nothing, too consumed by his addiction to see what was happening right in front of him. He still came home talking about his latest system, about how he was due for a big win, about how everything would be fine if I just trusted him. The breaking point came sooner than I planned. I caught him in our home office late one night, hunched over my laptop, trying to access my personal accounts. "What are you doing?" I asked from the doorway, making him jump. "Diana, I was just checking our accounts, making sure everything's in order." "No," I said quietly, "you were trying to steal from me. Again." His face darkened. "I wasn't stealing. I just need a little capital to implement my new strategy. Once I win big." "Stop." My voice was steel. "Just stop lying. To me, to yourself, to everyone." He stood up, his familiar face twisted with desperation. "You don't understand. I'm so close. One big win and I can fix everything. I just need What you need, I cut him off, is help. Professional help. But I can't help you, Mark. Not anymore. Professional help? Mark scoffed, running his hands through his graying hair. I don't need help. I need you to trust me. I laughed, a hollow sound that seemed to echo through our too big house. Trust you? Like I trusted you with our retirement, our house, our entire future. His face darkened. I made some mistakes, okay? But I can fix this. I just need a little more time, a little more capital. No. The word came out sharp, final. I'm done. I pulled an envelope from my purse and placed it on his desk. These are divorce papers. I've already moved most of my things out. The color drained from his face. What? You can't? Diana, please. We can work this out. Can we? I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Tell me exactly how we work out the fact that you've gambled away everything we spent 15 years building. He reached for me, but I stepped back. I know I messed up, he pleaded. But I love you. Doesn't that count for something? Love? I shook my head. Love doesn't empty joint accounts without permission. Love doesn't forge signatures or take out secret loans. Love doesn't destroy someone's life and then expect them to stick around for more. But I've already frozen all our joint accounts, I continued. My lawyer will be in touch about the division of assets. What's left of them anyway? Don't try to contact me directly. As I turned to leave, he called after me, his voice cracking. Where will you go? Somewhere you can't find me, I replied without looking back. Somewhere I can start over. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and financial damage control. My attorney worked to protect what assets remained while the forensic accountant continued uncovering the extent of Mark's deception. The numbers were staggering. $2.3 million in gambling losses, $800,000 in debt, multiple maxed-out credit cards, and a second mortgage I'd known nothing about. Mark didn't take it well. He alternated between desperate pleas and angry threats, showing up at my office, bombarding me with calls and texts. I documented everything, building an even stronger case for the divorce. He's spiraling, my private investigator reported. Spending more time at the casino, taking bigger risks. You should consider a restraining order. I didn't want it to come to that, but when Mark showed up at my new apartment one night, clearly drunk and demanding money, I had no choice. The police escorted him away, and the next day, I filed for the order. Through it all, I kept working, building my client base and reputation. My colleagues were supportive, many of them having suspected something was wrong long before I did. They helped me network, brought me new clients, gave me the professional foundation I needed to rebuild. One evening, about 2 months after I left, I received a call from an unknown number. It was the casino's security team. Mrs. Mitchell, we have your husband here. He's caused a disturbance, accused several dealers of cheating. He keeps saying you'll vouch for him, pay his markers. I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. I'm not responsible for him anymore. We're separated, and there's a restraining order in place. Understood, ma'am. We'll handle it from here. Later, I learned he'd been arrested for disorderly conduct and assault after trying to attack a dealer. It made the local news. Respected businessman Mark Mitchell, charged with multiple offenses at Encore Boston Harbor. The arrest seemed to wake something in him. His lawyer contacted mine, finally ready to discuss a settlement. Mark agreed to enter rehab as part of the divorce agreement, acknowledging his addiction and the damage he caused. I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I felt tired. Tired of the legal battles, tired of untangling our finances, tired of watching someone I'd love destroy himself and our life together. But beneath the exhaustion was something else. Determination. I'd survived this. More than survived, I was thriving. My personal client list had grown, my reputation stronger than ever. I'd moved to a smaller but comfortable apartment, started rebuilding my savings, and most importantly, reclaimed my sense of self. 6 months after finding that bank letter, I sat in the courtroom as our divorce was finalized. Mark was there, looking smaller somehow, the rehab having stripped away his false confidence. He tried to catch my eye, but I kept my gaze forward, focused on the judge. When it was over, he approached me in the hallway. Diana, Don't, I said quietly. Just don't. I just want you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I nodded, finally meeting his eyes. I hope you get better, Mark. I really do. but I can't be part of that journey. As I walked away, my heels clicking against the marble floor, I felt lighter than I had in months. The worst was over. Now came the part I'd been planning for, the rebuild. 1 year after the divorce, I sat in my office reviewing a client's portfolio when a familiar name popped up in my email: Mark's sister, Jennifer. I know we haven't spoken since everything happened, her message read, but I thought you should know, Mark's in trouble again. He relapsed after rehab. Borrowed money from Dad's retirement fund. They're about to lose their house. I stared at the screen, a mixture of emotions washing over me. Mark's parents had always been kind to me, treating me like their own daughter. The thought of them losing everything because of their son's addiction made my stomach turn. I'm not asking you to help, Jennifer continued. God knows you've been through enough. I just thought you deserved to know, since Dad listed you as his financial advisor years ago and never changed it. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about the man who had welcomed me into his family, who had taught me to fish on summer weekends, whose wife had shared secret family recipes with me over countless Sunday dinners. They didn't deserve this. After a moment's hesitation, I picked up my phone and dialed Jennifer's number. Tell me everything, I said when she answered. The story was grimly familiar. After rehab, Mark had stayed clean for a few months, found a job at a small accounting firm. But the addiction pulled him back, and this time, with his own assets gone and my financial guardrails no longer in place, he turned to his parents. He told them he needed money for a business opportunity, Jennifer explained, her voice tight with anger. Dad trusted him, gave him access to their accounts. By the time they realized what was happening. How much? I asked, already pulling up their file on my computer. Almost everything. Their savings, their investments. Dad even took out a second mortgage because Mark convinced him the returns would be worth it. I closed my eyes, remembering how easily Mark could persuade people when he wanted something. His charm had fooled me for years. Of course, his own parents would be even more susceptible. Send me all the paperwork, I said. Bank statements, loan documents, everything. And don't let them sign anything else. Over the next few weeks, I worked overtime, examining every transaction, every document, every possible angle. I reached out to colleagues in elder law, consulted with fraud specialists, built a case showing how Mark had manipulated his parents. The banks were surprisingly cooperative once I presented evidence of financial exploitation of seniors. The second mortgage was invalidated due to questionable circumstances. Investment firms reversed some transactions after we proved Mark had misrepresented himself. It wasn't a complete recovery, but it was enough to save their house, to preserve some dignity in their retirement. Throughout it all, I never spoke directly to Mark or his parents. Everything went through Jennifer or the lawyers. But one evening, as I was leaving my office, I found Mark's mother waiting by my car. Deanna, she said softly, her face lined with grief and gratitude. Jennifer told us what you did. Mrs. Mitchell. Please, she interrupted, stepping closer. Let me say this. We failed you. We should have seen what Mark was doing, should have supported you when everything fell apart. Instead, we let him convince us you were exaggerating, that you'd abandoned him when he needed you most. Tears spilled down her cheeks. We were wrong. So wrong. And even after everything, you still helped us. I felt my own eyes welling up. Your family, I said simply. What Mark did, that doesn't change the love and kindness you showed me for 15 years. She hugged me then, and for a moment I let myself remember the warmth of Sunday dinners, of family holidays, of belonging. He's agreed to long-term treatment, she said as she pulled away. Real treatment this time, not just rehab. Maybe this time it will stick. I nodded, hoping for their sake that she was right. Today, 2 years after finding that bank letter, my life looks very different. I've built a successful practice specializing in financial recovery and protection for families affected by addiction. Many clients come to me through Jennifer, who now runs a support group for families of gambling addicts. I still think about Mark sometimes, wonder if he's finally found his way to recovery. Jennifer keeps me updated. He's still in treatment, taking it seriously this time. His parents visit him regularly but maintain strict financial boundaries. Last week, I received a letter from him. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope but didn't open it immediately. When I finally did, I found 12 pages of apology, taking responsibility for every lie, every betrayal, every moment of trust broken. You saved our family twice, he wrote. Once by leaving, forcing me to face what I'd become, and again by helping mom and dad when you had every right to turn away. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking to be part of your life again. I just want you to know that I understand now. I understand everything. I filed the letter away in my desk drawer, next to the final divorce papers. It didn't change anything, couldn't change anything, but it felt like closing a chapter that had been left unfinished. Sometimes clients ask me how I can do this work, how I can immerse myself in stories of addiction and betrayal day after day. I tell them the truth, that understanding financial trauma from both sides, as a professional and as a survivor, gives me a unique perspective. That helping others protect themselves and rebuild their lives helps give meaning to my own experience. The money Mark gambled away is gone, but I've rebuilt my savings, my career, my life. More importantly, I've rebuilt my trust in myself. I know now that I'm stronger than I ever imagined, capable of not just surviving betrayal but of turning that pain into purpose. Last Sunday, I had dinner with Mark's parents and Jennifer. We didn't talk about Mark or the past. Instead, we shared a meal, told old stories, and enjoyed being family in a different, perhaps more honest way than before. As I drove home that night, I thought about how life's biggest betrayals can sometimes lead us exactly where we need to be. I'm not grateful for what Mark did. I'll never be grateful for that kind of betrayal, but I'm proud of who I've become because of it. A few days ago, a new client sat in my office, tears streaming down her face as she described discovering her husband's gambling addiction. She looked broken, lost, just like I had been 2 years ago. "I don't know how to start over," she whispered. I reached across the desk and took her hand. "Let me help you," I said. "I know exactly where to begin."
I was happily settled in life, having married into a wealthy family, yet Mason sat across from me in the hotel lobby, mockingly commenting on my seemingly simple lifestyle. His sharp voice pierced the calm, taunting me with his latest boast. He had married the daughter of the president of Goldsmith Enterprises. His laughter, filled with pride, echoed in the air, but it was the mention of Goldsmith Enterprises that truly caught my attention. The name was familiar, though I couldn't place it at first. Then, it clicked. As Mason continued to gloat, unaware of the humor I found in his bragging, I reflected on my life. My name is Patricia, and I'm 37 years old, living contentedly with my husband, Mason. I work in my family's real estate business, primarily handling administrative duties, while my father, the president, manages the company's broader strategies. As an only child, I'm expected to lead the company one day. Despite this looming responsibility, I've always strived to balance my personal and professional life, especially with Mason. Mason, who graduated high school and works at a moving company, has a physically demanding job I deeply respect. To avoid making him feel inadequate, I seldom mention my university degree or my anticipated future as company president. We met through a mutual friend during college after Mason's company helped her move. Initially, he was interested in her, but after she turned him down, we started to get to know each other. His laid-back demeanor complemented my meticulous nature, and our relationship blossomed. We married in our late 20s after a brief courtship, and his parents warmly embraced me, making my transition into his family seamless. For the most part, our marriage was smooth. Mason's demanding job often left him exhausted, but he remained devoted, even on his toughest days. He expressed gratitude when I stayed up to share dinner with him. I felt fortunate to have such a caring partner. However, after a year of marriage, cracks began to form in our once harmonious life. One night, as we prepared for bed, Mason unexpectedly brought up the topic of children. His tone, tinged with irritation, caught me off guard. While I also wanted children, I believed it would happen naturally with time. "It's only been a year, there's no rush," I reassured him. Despite my calm, Mason grew assertive, quoting statistics about the likelihood of conceiving within a year. The figure he mentioned seemed high, but I suggested a practical solution. "If you're concerned, maybe we should both get tested," I said, hoping to address any issues together. His reaction stunned me. "What are you implying? That it's my fault?" he snapped. "Usually, it's the woman's fault." His tone was laced with contempt. I was taken aback. I had never accused him of anything, yet Mason seemed intent on blaming me. "It's definitely the woman's fault," he added coldly. Hurt and shaken, I could barely muster a reply. "Of course," I said softly, "so just you get tested. I'm too busy with work." His response was equally harsh. "I have a job too. You know, you're just coasting along in your dad's company." His words stung. While my role involved administrative tasks, I was actively learning from my father, preparing to lead the business. That night, any attempt at discussion was futile, and we fell asleep turned away from each other, a heavy silence lingering between us. Over time, Mason's attitude shifted drastically. One evening, after a long meeting with my father, I returned home to find him irate over dinner not being ready. "I'm sorry," I explained hastily. "I just got home 15 minutes ago. I'll start cooking now." But Mason dismissed my apology. Typical of a small company's boss's daughter, he scoffed, failing to grasp the scale of my father's enterprise, a significant real estate firm with hundreds of employees. His bitterness cast a shadow over our daily lives. That night, as I rushed to the kitchen, I suggested he relax with a drink while I cooked. Alcohol, though a temporary balm, had become a troubling staple in maintaining peace. It pained me to see our relationship reduced to this. The next morning, his cold demeanor persisted as he left for work, his parting words sharp, "Make sure dinner's ready." When I got home, I exhaled deeply, my mind focused on the day ahead. I had taken the day off to visit the gynecologist for fertility testing, something Mason had insisted on, though he refused to participate himself. It was frustrating to face this alone, but complaining wouldn't change anything. If the problem lay with me, I was determined to start treatment immediately. Time was precious, fertility declines with age, and I wanted to address any issues without delay. The clinic was crowded, and I waited an hour before my examination. After a series of tests, the doctor explained that the results would be ready at my next appointment. The possibility that I might be the source of our fertility struggles was daunting, but I resolved to take whatever steps were necessary. When Mason came home that evening, I told him, "I went for the fertility test today." His response was as cutting as it was dismissive. "Figures if the problem's with you. It's good you're getting tested. Let me know the results." His assumption that I was solely to blame was hurtful, yet I held back my frustration, unwilling to escalate the tension. 6 years passed, and I turned 37. Our attempts to have a child remained unsuccessful, and Mason seemed to have resigned himself to the idea of never becoming a father. His late nights became more frequent, and sometimes he didn't come home at all. When he did, he would casually explain that he'd been out drinking and singing karaoke until dawn. His behavior resembled that of a carefree college student rather than a committed husband, and it was increasingly infuriating. Meanwhile, my career demands grew, and I had to push the dream of starting a family aside. But Mason's actions were becoming intolerable. His disregard for our marriage was painfully evident. One day, on his day off, Mason left the house but forgot his smartphone in the living room. I picked it up to place it in our bedroom, but it rang just then. The caller ID displayed a name, Diana. Assuming she was a colleague, I answered to let her know Mason had left his phone at home. "Hey, Mason, you're late. I've been waiting for 50 minutes, hurry up, or we'll miss the park opening. We haven't had a date in so long," a flirtatious voice said. I froze, stunned. The mention of a date sent my heart racing. This woman wasn't just a colleague, she was someone Mason was seeing romantically. My hands trembled as I hung up the phone, disbelief and anger coursing through me. While I had been dealing with the weight of potential infertility, Mason had been carelessly engaging in an affair. His recent distance and indifference now made perfect, painful sense. Still holding his phone, I felt the urge to confirm my suspicions. Unlocking it using his birthdate, I scrolled through his call history and messages. The evidence was undeniable. His exchanges with Diana were full of affectionate and intimate words that turned my stomach. I meticulously documented everything, taking photos of the messages and call logs with my phone. Then, I placed his device back in its usual spot, acting as though nothing had changed. A month passed in this unsettling limbo. One day, my father, the president of our company, called me into his office. "I have something important to discuss with you," he said gravely. His tone made me brace for serious news, adding another layer of stress to my already overwhelming situation. That evening, Mason, perhaps sensing the inevitable, suggested we consider separating. His timing couldn't have been more convenient. I had already been preparing to address his infidelity and initiate a divorce. "Yes, let's divorce," I agreed quickly. Mason seemed taken aback by my readiness, perhaps expecting resistance. His relief, likely fueled by thoughts of a future with Diana, stung deeply. He handed me divorce papers the next day, which I signed without hesitation. "I'll file these tomorrow. I'll be leaving the house," he said nonchalantly. "Are you sure about the mortgage?" I asked, suspecting he hadn't fully considered his financial situation. His job, while demanding, wasn't lucrative enough to cover the payments alone. but I didn't feel any obligation to cushion his transition. A few days later, I moved back to my parents' house. They were initially concerned about my well-being but became furious when I revealed Mason's betrayal. Their support and reassurance helped solidify my decision to leave him behind. I threw myself into work, using my responsibilities to distract from the emotional wreckage of my failed marriage. A year passed in a whirlwind of projects and commitments. One evening, noticing how consumed and fatigued I'd become, my father suggested I take a break. "Why don't you take a trip? Things will only get busier next month," he said, his concern evident. Grateful for the suggestion, I decided to take a solo trip to the Northeast, craving peace and a change of scenery. The crisp air of the Northeast was invigorating, cleansing my weary soul. The locals were kind and welcoming, their warmth slowly mending my spirit. Wanting to indulge in the best experience possible, I booked a stay in a renowned Los Angeles hotel for the final leg of my journey. After checking in, I settled into the lobby with a welcome drink, letting the fatigue of the past year melt away. For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope for what lay ahead. The serene atmosphere of the hotel lobby wrapped around me as I sipped my drink, feeling a rare and precious sense of peace. I half joked to myself about moving to Los Angeles when a familiar voice pierced through my thoughts. "Huh? Hey, what are you doing here?" I turned, startled, and my heart sank. It was Mason, my ex-husband, entering the lobby with 2 large suitcases. The last thing I expected on this journey of healing was to encounter him. Beside him was a young woman, likely in her early 20s, with flawless skin, bold makeup, and striking red nails. She wore a short skirt that seemed inappropriate for the chilly weather, but her confidence carried it off. "Mason?" I blurted out, disbelief clear in my voice. "Who is she?" "Oh, let me introduce you," Mason said, grinning with an excitement I hadn't seen in years. "This is Diana, my new wife. We're on our honeymoon, and guess what? She's the daughter of a wealthy businessman." Diana, the name hit me like a thunderclap. She was the same Diana from the phone call that had revealed Mason's betrayal. A wave of discomfort surged through me as Mason's pride in marrying someone young and rich became all too obvious. "You're here alone? That's sad," Mason sneered, his words dripping with disdain. Diana smirked as she eyed me. "Mason, is this your ex-wife?" she asked, her tone sharp. "She looks old. Hurry up with the check-in," she added, irritated. Mason draped an arm around her and laughed, a grating sound that broke the tranquility of the lobby. "Yeah, I'm set for life now, marrying into money. Thanks for making the divorce so easy, Patricia," he said mockingly. "Diana's dad is the head of Goldsmith Enterprises. They even paid off our house mortgage in a snap." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Goldsmith Enterprises?" I said casually. "Oh, I know them. Their main office is in that big building downtown, right?" Mason looked momentarily surprised. "You've been there?" "Yes," I replied evenly. "That building is part of my father's real estate portfolio. He bought it recently for $500 million. He's mentioned them before. They're a tenant, though apparently not the best one." Mason and Diana exchanged puzzled glances. "What do you mean?" Diana asked, her confidence wavering. I let the silence linger for a moment before continuing. "Goldsmith Enterprises has been late on their rent for months. My father was just talking about starting legal action if it doesn't get resolved." Diana's face paled. "That's impossible. Our company is doing great," she stammered, her voice filled with doubt. "I'm not making this up," I said calmly, pulling out my phone. I called my father and asked him to send over the most recent rent notice. Within moments, I showed them the document, which clearly listed Goldsmith Enterprises' overdue payments. Diana's bravado crumbled. "Come to think of it," she murmured, "Dad has been stressed lately, talking about slow sales and layoffs." Mason, however, exploded in denial. "You're lying. You're just trying to ruin us. You've always been spiteful," he shouted, his accusations loud enough to draw glances from nearby guests. His words were a sharp echo of our troubled past, but this time, they didn't sting. "Spiteful?" I repeated, my tone steady. "Mason, I have no reason to care about your life. You moved on, and so have I. I just feel sorry for Diana. Did you marry her for her money, just like you rushed into marriage with me to have kids? You always blame others for your problems, but here's the truth, I'm over you. Completely." Mason's face twisted with anger. Arrogant as ever, he spat. "You can't even have kids. Diana and I are planning to start a family after this trip. I smiled faintly. Oh, I didn't mention it, did I? I'm 5 months pregnant. His jaw dropped. I remarried, I continued. My husband supports me in every way you never could. And for the record, Mason, I had no fertility issues. The clinic confirmed it years ago. If you're wondering why you and Diana haven't conceived, maybe you should take a hard look at yourself. The color drained from Mason's face. Does that mean his voice faltered. Diana's scorn flared. You're infertile? Why didn't you tell me, she snapped. Feeling no need to linger, I delivered my final words. Please settle the overdue rent soon, or we'll pursue legal action. Goodbye, Mason. As I walked away, their voices rose in an argument behind me. Back in my room, I felt a deep sense of closure. When I returned from the trip, my husband greeted me warmly. Welcome back. I hope you had a chance to relax. I did, I replied, smiling. For the first time in years, I felt truly free from my past. Later, I learned through my father's connections that Goldsmith Enterprises had spiraled into financial ruin, mired in scandal and debt. Mason's dreams of luxury had crumbled as swiftly as they'd been built. My life, by contrast, was filled with new beginnings and genuine love. I had moved on, not just from Mason, but from the shadow he had cast over my life.
I never planned to keep my success a secret. Life just worked out that way. Growing up in Singapore, my parents taught me the value of hard work and education. Emily, knowledge is the one thing nobody can take from you, my father would say as he drove his taxi late into the night to fund my studies. My mother worked 2 jobs, and together they made sure I had everything I needed to excel. Their sacrifice paid off. I graduated top of my class in finance and landed a position at one of Asia's largest banks. By 28, I was the youngest division head in the bank's history, managing over $50 billion in corporate loans. But few knew this side of me. I met James at my friend's small cafe where I loved to work on weekends, helping out just to stay grounded. He walked in one rainy morning, ordered a latte, and smiled when I drew a little heart in the foam. This is the best coffee I've had in months, he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The secret is making it with care, I replied, wiping down the counter. He came back every weekend after that. We talked about everything, his work as an architect, his dreams of designing sustainable buildings, his close relationship with his family. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, enjoying how he saw me for who I was, not what I owned. When he finally asked me out, I said yes without hesitation. Our first date was at a humble hawker center, sharing plates of char kway teow and laughing about nothing in particular. I fell in love with his kindness, his integrity, and how he treated everyone with respect, regardless of their status. My family's a bit traditional, he warned me before our first dinner with them. They can be judgmental about status and career. Don't worry, I assured him, I can handle it. I wasn't prepared for Richard Chen, James's father. A self-made real estate tycoon, he dominated every room he entered. His wife, Helen, was equally intimidating in her designer clothes and perfectly coiffed hair. James's sister, Victoria, took after their mother, down to her dismissive glance when I mentioned working at a cafe. A cafe? Richard's voice boomed across the dinner table. James, I thought you said she went to university. She did, Dad. Emily has a degree in. Clearly not putting it to good use, Richard interrupted. In this family, we believe in ambition. Excellence. Not serving coffee. I saw James's face redden, but he stayed silent. Helen touched her pearl necklace, a habit I learned meant she was about to deliver a carefully crafted insult. Dear, perhaps you could help Emily find a more suitable position. The cleaning company we use is always hiring. Victoria snickered. At least she'd have health insurance. I maintained my composure, years of high-stakes negotiations serving me well. I enjoy my current work, but thank you for your concern. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of subtle digs and patronizing advice. James apologized profusely on the drive home. They'll come around, he promised. They just need time to know you. But they did. Over the next year, as James and I grew closer, his family's disdain only intensified. Every family gathering became an exercise in endurance. Richard never missed an opportunity to remind everyone of my humble station. Helen orchestrated seating arrangements to keep me far from important guests. Victoria openly suggested James find someone more appropriate. When James proposed, their reaction was predictable. A cafe worker, Richard exploded. "Have you lost your mind?" "Dad, I love her." James stood firm. "Love won't maintain our family standing," Richard shot back. "If you marry her, don't expect any support from me." But James chose me. We had a small, beautiful wedding, without his family present. Months passed. I continued my weekend cafe shifts, finding peace in the simple work while managing billion-dollar deals during a week. James respected my choice to keep my career private, understanding my need to be loved for myself, not my position. Then came the annual Chen family reunion. "We have to go," James insisted. "They're still family." I agreed, hoping time had softened their hearts. I was wrong. The reunion was held at Richard's mansion, a sprawling estate that screamed old money. The moment we arrived, I felt the familiar weight of judgmental stares. "Oh, the cafe girl still hasn't found a real job." Victoria's voice carried across the garden. How persistent. Richard gathered everyone for his annual family address, champagne flowing freely as he boasted about the family's achievements. Then he spotted us. "Ah, James, come, tell everyone about your new project." His eyes slid past me. "And your wife can serve drinks. It's what she's good at, yes." Laughter rippled through the crowd. James opened his mouth to protest, but before he could speak, a commotion erupted near the house. Richard's secretary came running out, face pale. "Mr. Chen, urgent call from the bank." "Not now," Richard waved her off. "We're celebrating." "Sir, it's about the emergency loans." "They're denied." Richard's smile faltered. "Impossible. I spoke with the division head yesterday." "No, sir. The new CEO is reviewing all major loans personally. They're requesting a meeting tomorrow." I felt my phone vibrate, my own secretary calling. I knew what this was about. Richard's company had been flagged for suspicious accounting, and as CEO of the corporate banking division, I had ordered a complete audit. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. "Excuse me," I said quietly, stepping away from the crowd to take my call. "Ma'am," my secretary whispered, "Chen Development's financials are worse than we thought. The audit shows systematic misrepresentation of assets." "Send me the files," I replied. "I'll review them tonight." When I returned, Richard was in full crisis mode. His face had lost its usual smugness, replaced by barely concealed panic. He was barking orders into his phone while Helen hovered nearby, wringing her perfectly manicured hands. Victoria sidled up to me, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Looks like Daddy's company is having issues. Not that you understand business matters. More champagne?" I smiled politely. "No, thank you. But I do have a question. How's your position at your father's company?" She preened. "I'm Executive Vice President of Operations." "Interesting. And what exactly do you do?" Her smile faltered. "I oversee things. Important things. Like the shell companies in the Cayman Islands." Victoria's glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Several heads turned our way. "I don't know what you're talking about," she hissed. "The ones hiding your father's debt? Or perhaps the inflated property valuations?" Before she could respond, Richard's voice boomed across the garden. "Everyone, party's over. Family emergency." As guests began to leave, Richard pulled James aside. "Son, I need your help. The bank, they're being unreasonable. Your architecture firm has good relationships with other banks, yes." James looked uncomfortable. "Dad, we're just a small firm. We don't handle those kinds of loans." "Useless," Richard exploded. "Just like your choice in wife. If I lose this company, it's on your head for bringing bad luck into this family." That was enough. I stepped forward, my phone in hand. "Mr. Chen, I believe we have a meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. He barely glanced at me. "This doesn't concern you, coffee girl." "Actually, it does." I opened my banking app, displaying my executive profile. "I'm the CEO you'll be meeting." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and horror. Helen's pearl necklace clattered to the ground. Victoria looked like she might faint. "That's impossible," Richard stammered. Emily Chen, CEO of Corporate Banking Division, Singapore United Bank, I stated calmly. Your loan applications crossed my desk last week. The irregularities were concerning. James stared at me, mouth agape. Emily? All this time, I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I own. I explained softly. You gave me that gift. Your family, not so much. Richard suddenly straightened, his businessman instincts kicking in. Well, this is wonderful news. We're all family here. Surely we can work something out. Family? I echoed. Like when you called me a gold digger at our wedding reception. Or when you told your business associates that James married beneath his station. Helen stepped forward, arms outstretched. Darling, we were just protecting our son. Surely you understand. I understand perfectly. You judged me, humiliated me, and treated me like dirt because you thought I was beneath you. Now you want my help? Victoria attempted damage control. Emily, sweetie, we were just teasing. It was all in good fun. I turned to James. Did you know about your sister's role in the company? He shook his head. She said she was handling operations. She's been helping your father hide debt and inflate assets. The audit shows years of financial manipulation. Richard's face turned purple. Now see here, you can't just. I can and I will, I interrupted. Tomorrow's meeting isn't about loans, it's about fraud investigation. The color drained from his face. You wouldn't dare, we're family. Family? I laughed softly. Let me share some wisdom from my father, the taxi driver you mocked at my wedding. He taught me that true family supports you, believes in you, and loves you regardless of your status. You've done none of those things. I took James's hand. The authorities will be contacting you tomorrow. I suggest you get your lawyers ready. As we turned to leave, Helen called out desperately. Wait, what about Victoria? She was just following orders. I paused at the door. Actions have consequences, Helen. Victoria chose to participate in fraud. She'll face the same investigation as everyone else. The drive home was silent. Finally, James spoke. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have treated me differently if you knew? He thought for a moment. No, I fell in love with you, not your job. That's why I fell in love with you too. I squeezed his hand. I'm sorry for keeping this from you. I just needed to know our love was real. What happens now? I sighed. Your father's company will be investigated. With the evidence we have, there will likely be criminal charges. Victoria too, if she's implicated. And us. That depends. Can you handle being married to a woman who makes more than your entire family combined? James laughed, the tension breaking. I think I'll manage, but no more secrets. No more secrets, I promised. The next morning, the Chen family empire began to crumble. Richard arrived at my office precisely at 9 a.m., flanked by his lawyers. Gone was the arrogant tycoon. In his place sat a man who finally realized he wasn't the most powerful person in the room. The audit revealed systematic fraud spanning 5 years, I stated, sliding the report across my desk. Falsified valuations, hidden debts, shell companies. It's all here. We can explain, his lawyer began. No need. The evidence has been forwarded to the authorities. Richard leaned forward. Emily, please, think about what this will do to the family name. Like you thought about my reputation when you told everyone I was a gold digger? Before he could respond, my secretary interrupted. Ma'am, the police are here. What followed was a media circus. Chen Development CEO arrested for fraud splashed across headlines. Victoria was taken into custody next, her designer handbag clutched to her chest as officers led her away. Helen had a very public breakdown at the country club. James stood by me through it all, though I knew it pained him to see his family fall apart. They did this to themselves, he said one evening as we watched the news coverage. You just exposed the truth. Weeks turned into months. The investigation uncovered more than even I had suspected. Richard had been running a complex scheme, using inflated property valuations to secure loans, then channeling the money through shell companies. Victoria had helped coordinate the fraud, her executive position nothing more than a front. The trial was swift. Richard and Victoria were both sentenced to prison. 8 years for him, 5 for her. Helen was spared criminal charges but lost everything in the asset forfeitures. One day, as autumn painted Singapore's gardens in golden hues, Helen appeared at my office. I know I have no right to be here, she began, her designer clothes replaced by simple cotton. But I need to say something. I gestured for her to continue. I was wrong about you. So terribly wrong. Tears filled her eyes. We judged you because we thought wealth and status were everything. Now I'm alone, living in a small apartment, working as a sales clerk, and I finally understand. Understand what? That character matters more than cash. You were kind to us even when we were cruel. You could have destroyed us completely, but you let the law take its course. That's real class. I studied her face, seeing genuine remorse for the first time. What do you want, Helen? A chance. Not to be close, I know I don't deserve that. But to apologize to you and James. To try to be better. 6 months later, we hosted a small dinner party. Helen came bringing homemade dumplings, a skill she'd learned in her new life. She was different now, humbler, more genuine. James was healing too, visiting his father and sister in prison, working through years of family dysfunction. As for me, I kept my weekend shifts at the cafe. Not because I needed to hide anymore, but because I loved the simplicity of making someone's day better with a perfect cup of coffee. One morning, a young woman came in, looking defeated. Rough day? I asked, drawing a heart in her latte foam. My boyfriend's parents think I'm not good enough, she sighed. Wrong background, wrong job. I smiled, remembering where my own journey began. Let me tell you a story about family, pride, and what really matters in the end. Life has a way of teaching us its most important lessons. Sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what truly matters. Richard and Victoria learned this in prison. Helen learned it through humility. And I learned that being true to yourself is worth more than all the wealth in the world. James and I are expecting our first child now. We've decided to name her Grace, a reminder that sometimes the hardest situations deserve a measure of mercy. Helen is excited to be a grandmother, and even Richard, through his prison letters, seems to be reflecting on what kind of legacy he really wants to leave. The cafe still stands, a humble reminder of where our story began. Sometimes customers recognize me, the banking CEO who serves coffee on weekends. They often ask why I still do it. My answer is simple. Every cup of coffee is a chance to make someone's day better, and at the end of our lives, isn't that what matters most? They usually smile, understanding or not. But I know my truth. Success isn't about power or revenge or even proving others wrong. It's about staying true to yourself, showing kindness even when it's not deserved, and remembering that everyone, even those who hurt us, deserves a chance at redemption. As I write this, I'm sitting in the cafe, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of hope. James will join me soon, as he does every weekend. Helen might stop by with her dumplings. Life isn't perfect, but it's real and rich with lessons learned. And sometimes, when I'm making coffee or reviewing billion-dollar deals, I think about my father's words. Knowledge is the one thing nobody can take from you. He was right, but he missed something important: integrity, compassion, and the courage to be yourself. Those are things nobody can take either. I never expected my career choice would tear my family apart, but looking back, it was just the trigger that exposed what had been brewing beneath the surface for years. Teaching wasn't just a job for me, it was my calling. After graduating top of my class from Stanford, I shocked everyone by turning down lucrative tech offers to teach at Lincoln Public High School. My brother James supported me initially, but everything changed when he married Victoria 3 years ago. Victoria came from old money and never let anyone forget it. She worked as a marketing executive at Reynolds Technologies, one of the biggest tech companies in Silicon Valley. From day one, she made it clear she thought I was wasting my potential. Stanford degree and you're just teaching, she'd say, wrinkling her perfectly powdered nose. Such a waste, Sarah. You could be making 6 figures by now. I usually brushed off her comments, focusing instead on my students who needed me. Lincoln High served a struggling community, but my AP Physics students had a 98% pass rate last year. That mattered more to me than any salary. Then came the dinner party that changed everything. James and Victoria were hosting a gathering for her work colleagues at their newly renovated mansion in Pacific Heights. I almost didn't go, but James insisted. Please, Sarah. Victoria's boss will be there. It's important to her. I should have trusted my instincts. The evening started awkwardly enough. Victoria had seated me at the far end of the table, away from the important guests. I recognized several tech executives from the news, all dressed impeccably, discussing stock options and vacation homes. "Sarah, darling," Victoria's voice carried across the table, dripping with false sweetness. "Do tell everyone what you do. I'm sure they'd find it interesting." I straightened in my chair. "I teach AP Physics at Lincoln High School." The silence was deafening. Victoria's laugh broke it like shattering glass. "Can you believe it? Stanford graduate, could have been anything, and she chose to babysit teenagers in the worst school district in the city." Several guests tittered nervously. James stared at his plate, saying nothing. "Teachers are just failed professionals," Victoria continued, warming to her audience. "No offense, Sarah, but those who can do. Those who can't, well, you know the rest." My hands trembled under the table, but I kept my voice steady. "My students." "Oh, your precious students," Victoria interrupted. "Face it, Sarah, you're wasting your life playing hero to kids who'll probably drop out anyway. When was the last time you made any real difference?" That's when a deep voice from the doorway cut through the room like thunder. "Miss Anderson." Everyone turned. A tall man in an expensive suit stood there, his presence commanding immediate attention. I recognized him instantly. Michael Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Technologies, Victoria's boss. "Mr. Reynolds," Victoria jumped up, fawning. "We weren't expecting you so early." But he wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on me, and to everyone's shock, they were filling with tears. "Miss Anderson," he said again, his voice thick with emotion. "You probably don't remember me, but my son Alex was in your class last year." The room went deadly quiet. Victoria's face turned an interesting shade of white. "Alex Reynolds," I said softly, remembering the quiet boy who'd sat in the back of my class. "He worked so hard. He was failing every class before he met you," Mr. Reynolds continued, walking toward me. "The divorce hit him hard. Other teachers had given up on him. But you," he paused, composing himself. "You stayed after school with him every day for months. You believed in him when no one else did." I felt tears prickling my own eyes. Alex was brilliant. He just needed someone to see it. "He's at MIT now," Mr. Reynolds said proudly, "on a full scholarship. He calls it the Miss Anderson Scholarship because he says he never would have made it without you." The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear Victoria's nervous breathing. "When he told me his physics teacher's name, I couldn't believe it," Mr. Reynolds continued. "I've been trying to track you down to thank you. I never expected to find you here." He turned to address the entire table. "This woman isn't just a teacher. She's a miracle worker. She takes kids who've lost hope and shows them their own potential. She could have chosen an easier path, made more money, but she chose to make a difference instead." Victoria looked like she might faint. James was staring at me with a mixture of pride and shame. "Miss Anderson," Mr. Reynolds said formally, "I have a proposition for you, but perhaps we should discuss it somewhere more supportive." I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady. For the first time all evening, I felt truly seen. "I think that's an excellent idea, Mr. Reynolds." As we walked toward the door, I heard Victoria's strangled whisper to James. "Did you know? Why didn't you tell me?" But I didn't stop to hear his response. Something told me this was just the beginning of a much bigger story. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from James and Victoria. I ignored them all. Instead, I focused on the business card Mr. Reynolds had given me the night before. 9 a.m., Reynolds Technologies headquarters. As I stepped into the gleaming office building, wearing my best blazer, which probably cost less than Victoria's lipstick, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation from last night. After leaving the disastrous dinner party, Mr. Reynolds had taken me to a quiet cafe nearby. "Miss Anderson," he'd said, "what you did for Alex, that kind of dedication is rare. We need more of that in education." Now his assistant led me to a conference room where I found not just Mr. Reynolds, but an entire board of directors. "Sarah," Mr. Reynolds smiled warmly, "thank you for coming. We have something important to discuss." But before he could continue, the door burst open. Victoria stood there, looking perfectly polished despite her obvious agitation. "Michael, I can explain everything about last night." She stopped short seeing me there. "What is she doing here?" Mr. Reynolds' smile turned cold. "Mrs. Thompson, this is a private meeting, and you're interrupting the discussion about our new $50 million education initiative." Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. Education initiative. Yes, Mr. Reynolds continued. We're launching a comprehensive program to transform struggling schools across the city, and we want Sarah to lead it. I sat there stunned as he laid out the details. Reynolds Technologies was creating a foundation to provide resources, technology, and support to public schools. They wanted me to be the executive director. The salary is $250,000 annually, he added casually, plus full benefits and a significant budget for program implementation. Victoria made a choking sound. But I hesitated. I'm just a teacher. No, Mr. Reynolds said firmly, you're an educator who understands what these kids really need. You're exactly who we need. Victoria's face had turned an alarming shade of red. But she's not qualified. I've been working here for 5 years. If anyone should lead a new initiative. Speaking of your work here, Mr. Reynolds interrupted, opening a folder. We should discuss some irregularities in your department's expense reports. Victoria went pale. It seems, he continued, you've been charging personal expenses as business costs. Quite substantial amounts, actually. I can explain, Victoria stammered. I'm sure you can, Mr. Reynolds said coldly. To the audit team, please clear out your desk by end of day. Victoria turned to me, her designer mask finally cracking. You planned this, she shrieked. You're trying to ruin me. Mrs. Thompson, Mr. Reynolds' voice was steel. Security will escort you out. As Victoria was led away, still shouting accusations, Mr. Reynolds turned back to me. I apologize for that interruption. Now about the position. I held up my hand. Before I accept, I need to know something. Did you really fire her because of me? He shook his head. We've been investigating her for months. Your brother's wife has been embezzling company funds to maintain her lavish lifestyle. Last night's dinner party, charged to the company, her designer wardrobe, company cards, she's been stealing for years. I thought about all the times Victoria had mocked my modest teacher's salary, all while stealing to fund her own lifestyle. There's more, Mr. Reynolds continued. Your brother should know that Victoria has been using company resources to fund a secret apartment where she meets her personal trainer. My heart sank for James. First the embezzlement, now infidelity. My phone buzzed again. Another message from James. Sarah, please. Victoria says you got her fired. What's going on? I looked at Mr. Reynolds. I need time to think about the offer, and I need to talk to my brother. He nodded understandingly. Of course, with Sarah. Whatever you decide about the position, Victoria's actions have caught up with her. That's not on you. As I left the building, I saw Victoria being escorted out, carrying a box of her belongings. Our eyes met briefly. The hatred in hers was scalding. My phone buzzed once more. This time it was a text from Victoria. You've ruined everything. I'll make you pay for this. I took a deep breath and called James. It was time for some hard truths, but something told me this story wasn't over yet. Victoria wasn't the type to go down without a fight. I didn't expect to find Victoria waiting at my apartment that evening, but there she was. Mascara streaked down her face, designer outfit wrinkled, looking nothing like the polished socialite who'd mocked me just yesterday. You must be so happy, she spat as I approached my door. You've destroyed everything I built. You destroyed it yourself, Victoria, I replied calmly, though my heart was racing. The embezzlement, the affair. James knows, she cut me off, laughing hysterically. Your precious brother knows everything now. Happy. But you don't know the whole story, dear sister-in-law. Something in her tone made me pause. What are you talking about? Victoria's smile was cruel. Why do you think James never defended you? All those times I insulted you, belittled your career, he agreed with every word. You're lying, I said, but uncertainty crept into my voice. Am I? She pulled out her phone. Let me play you something interesting. A recording started playing. James's voice filled the air. Of course I love Sarah, but Victoria is right. She's wasting her potential. It's embarrassing having to explain to people that my Stanford-educated sister teaches at some poor kid's school. Sometimes I wish she'd just. I couldn't listen anymore. Turn it off. He's been laughing behind your back for years, Victoria continued. We both have. The only difference is I was honest about it. My hands trembled as I unlocked my door. Leave, Victoria. Oh, I'm leaving, she said, standing up. But first, you should know, James wasn't just aware of the embezzlement. He helped me do it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What? Those company funds. Half of them went to his secret trading account. He's as guilty as I am. And now, thanks to you, it's all coming out. Her smile was venomous. Congratulations, Sarah. You haven't just ruined my life, you've destroyed your brother's too. She turned to leave, then paused. By the way, I've already sent copies of all his involvement to the Reynolds Technologies legal team. They should be contacting law enforcement soon. Have fun explaining to your students why their beloved teacher's brother is in prison. After she left, I sat in my dark apartment, her words echoing in my head. My phone lit up with a call from James. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call came, Mr. Reynolds. Sarah, he said when I answered, his voice grave. We've received some concerning documents about James's involvement in Victoria's scheme. I wanted you to hear it from me first. I closed my eyes. Is it true? The evidence is substantial. I'm sorry, but we'll have to pursue legal action against both of them. I thought about my students, about Alex Reynolds, about all the kids who trusted me to guide them toward a better future. Mr. Reynolds, I said finally, about your offer. Yes. I want to accept. But I need to know, will my brother's actions affect the Foundation's work? There was a pause. Sarah, your brother's choices are his own. Just like Victoria's. What matters is what you choose to do now. I looked at the family photo on my wall. James and me as kids, smiling, innocent. With a steady hand, I took it down. When do I start? The next few weeks were a blur. James and Victoria were both arrested. The story made local headlines. Tech executive and husband charged in $1 million embezzlement scheme. I threw myself into building the Education Foundation. Mr. Reynolds was true to his word. We started implementing programs in struggling schools across the city. Every time I saw a student's face light up with understanding, every time I helped a teacher get resources they desperately needed, I knew I'd made the right choice. 6 months later, I sat in a courthouse for James's sentencing. He turned to look at me, his face gaunt. Sarah, he started. I'm so. Save it? I cut him off. You had years to be honest with me. Focus on being honest with yourself now. As I walked out of the courthouse, my phone buzzed with a message from one of my former students. Miss Anderson, guess what? I got accepted to Stanford. Just like you. I smiled, tears in my eyes. Victoria had been wrong about everything. Success isn't measured in dollars or status. It's measured in lives changed, in potential realized, in truth spoken even when it hurts. The foundation is thriving now. We've expanded to 50 schools with plans for more. Sometimes I drive past James and Victoria's old mansion. It's been sold to pay restitution. I don't feel satisfaction, just a quiet certainty that justice has a way of finding everyone eventually. Last week, I ran to Victoria's mother at a cafe. She started to turn away, but I called out to her. Mrs. Carter, I said, I'm sorry about how things turned out. She paused, then spoke softly. Victoria called from prison. She said you were right all along. About everything. I nodded and let her go. Some victories don't need to be celebrated, they just need to be acknowledged. As for me, I still teach one AP physics class. It keeps me grounded, reminds me why we're doing all this. On my desk sits a photo of my latest class, all smiling, all full of potential. Next to it is my old nameplate, Miss Anderson, physics teacher. Below it sits my new one, Sarah Anderson, Executive Director, Reynolds Education Foundation. Turns out you don't have to choose between doing good and doing well. Sometimes, if you stay true to yourself, you can do both. The key necklace Mr. Reynolds gave me at the foundation launch catches the light. Its inscription reads, "Education changes everything." I touch it and smile. Victoria and James chose greed over integrity. They thought they were building something, but it was all a house of cards. I chose to build something real, something lasting. And that has made all the difference.
The inheritance of $10 million from our parents would soon be decided, and I knew my sister Megan's intentions all too well. She made it clear she believed our parents adored her more and would have wanted her to inherit everything. You know, it's obvious, she said with a smirk. Why would they leave anything to someone as plain as you? Megan had hardly contributed during our parents' funeral. While I managed the overwhelming arrangements, she spent her time discussing the inheritance. As though she couldn't wait for the formalities to end, she eventually made her stance clear. "I'll take it all. Fine by me if you never contact me again," she said mockingly. Who would want to? I thought. She didn't realize she was the one being cut off, not me. Without a word, I turned my back on her laughter, feeling only a hollow resignation. I had lost my sister as surely as I'd lost our parents, yet no sadness came. I am Hillary, a 35-year-old office worker. Both of our parents were entrepreneurs who built successful businesses, allowing my sister and me to graduate from private schools and universities. After finishing my studies, I joined a company where I've worked steadily ever since. Megan, on the other hand, never sought stability. She drifted through life, taking occasional part-time jobs without any concrete plans for her future. Despite her lack of direction, our parents indulged her. They provided for her expenses and adventures, while urging me to be prudent and self-sufficient. The difference in treatment was painfully clear. Megan's life of ease was granted because of her extraordinary beauty. She had inherited our mother's large, expressive eyes and double eyelids, our father's sharp nose, and our grandmother's elegant figure. Everywhere she went, she turned heads, exuding charm and confidence. I, however, was not so fortunate. I had my mother's low nose, my father's small eyes, and my grandfather's stocky build. From the moment Megan was born, 6 years after me, she became the family's darling, effortlessly overshadowing me. As a child, I adored her, and she would follow me around, calling me Hillary. But by the time she reached elementary school, her beauty garnered attention that highlighted my own insecurities. Scouts would arrive to recruit her for modeling opportunities, but I was often met with polite dismissal. As I entered adolescence, Megan became aware of her advantages. By high school, she used them to torment me openly. She'd take my belongings, sometimes claiming them as her own, and stage melodramatic scenes to paint herself as the victim. Our parents always sided with her. "Hillary, you're the older sister," they'd chide. "Be patient with Megan. She's just teasing you." No amount of protest changed their perception. By the time I graduated university, I had had enough. I moved out and avoided home, taking holiday jobs to keep from returning. For years, I distanced myself from the family, rejecting their pleas to come back. Then, 3 years ago, everything changed. Our parents died in a sudden car accident, forcing Megan and me to confront each other after years of separation. At the funeral, she cried incessantly while I handled the arrangements, grieving quietly. But when the subject turned to inheritance, Megan's tears dried up, replaced by cold calculation. Our parents' estate, worth $10 million, was now the focus. It was no surprise when Megan began asserting her entitlement, but her attitude only confirmed one thing: I had no reason to stay tethered to her anymore. "I'm taking it all," Megan sneered. "After all, you're unattractive, and our parents loved me more. They'd want me to have everything." "Oh, do you need some money for plastic surgery?" "I don't want it," I replied calmly. Her surprise was evident, but I meant every word. The idea of inheriting was meaningless to me, especially after the chaos surrounding our parents' sudden deaths. There had been no time to grieve, as I was overwhelmed by the demands of relatives, subordinates, and business partners at the funeral. The whispered remarks comparing us, "Are they even sisters? They don't look alike at all," paired with Megan's smug expressions only deepened my exhaustion. "I don't want the inheritance," I repeated. "You can have all $10 million, but there's one condition." Megan tensed, narrowing her eyes. "What condition?" "I won't take a cent, but in exchange, I'm severing all ties with you. From this moment on, we're no longer family. No contact, no help, ever." At first, she seemed stunned, but as the terms sank in, a smirk spread across her face. $10 million and cutting you off? Perfect. Why would I ever need someone as ugly as you? Just don't come crying to me later." Ignoring her mocking laughter, I left our family home for good. I had lost my parents and now my sister, but the relief of cutting ties outweighed any lingering sadness. 3 months passed peacefully until Megan began bombarding me with calls. I ignored them at first, but since I needed my phone for work, I reluctantly answered. "Hillary, I need a favor," she demanded. "I don't have a sister," I said coldly. "Stop contacting me." As I tried to hang up, she pressed on, her tone self-pitying but unapologetic. "I tried to spend Dad's money, but a friend at City Hall said I need to consult about inheritance taxes. Isn't it just mine? Do I really need to pay taxes for money my own father left me? I don't know any lawyers, so can you handle it?" Her entitlement gave me a headache. but I decided to clarify the situation to shut her down. For the record, there's no inheritance tax in this case since the amount is under $1, 4 million, but you only have access because I renounced my claim. I already informed a lawyer, so I have no rights to Dad's estate. Any issues are your problem now. Wait, that's great, she began. Don't thank me, I interrupted, and don't contact me again. Megan ended the call in a huff. It was clear she hadn't done her homework. Inheritance isn't as simple as taking the money and running. Assets go through probate, and debts are settled before distribution. Megan's ignorance of these processes would soon catch up with her. Weeks later, Megan consulted a lawyer and learned the harsh truth. The $10 million was the total value of our parents' assets, not liquid cash. Most of it was tied to the businesses they had started, and Megan, who had no involvement, wasn't entitled to much. Worse, she discovered she was responsible for business debts as a co-signer on some loans. By the time debts were deducted, her inheritance amounted to just $1 million. Her calls resumed, this time frantic and tearful. Hillary, I'm only getting $1 million. This doesn't make any sense. That's still a lot of money, I said, exasperated, like winning the lottery. Didn't I tell you not to contact me again? But Megan, who had expected millions, wouldn't stop. Her troubles only grew when rumors spread that she had inherited $10 million. Relatives, supposed friends, and even strangers hounded her for money. Stalkers and extortionists appeared, drawn by the false rumor. Hillary, help me, she begged in desperation. Where are you now? But I had long since left her behind. The silence in my life was precious, and I had no intention of losing it again. Megan's frantic screams filled my voicemail. I'm suffering so much, she cried, her desperation palpable. Judging by her messages, she had visited my old apartment, unaware that I had terminated the lease and moved elsewhere. With no way to reach me, she resorted to relentless calls and voicemails. Eventually, she even went to the police. However, having boasted about inheriting $10 million and flaunting her newfound wealth by gifting designer bags, her plight was seen as self-inflicted. Rumors of her inheritance had spread like wildfire, and the authorities, overwhelmed by her situation, advised her to move. Then, one day, her voicemails took on a cheery tone. Hillary, I've met the man of my dreams, Peter. He doesn't know about the inheritance and truly loves me. I suspected a scam immediately. Sure enough, Peter, a man Megan met by chance, had proposed they move in together after learning about her savings. He convinced her that banks were risky and suggested she keep her money in a home safe instead. Megan, ignoring all advice, closed her account, converted her inheritance into cash, and stored it in the safe. The next day, the safe was empty, and Peter was gone. Her voicemails quickly turned chaotic again. I was deceived. Peter was only after the money. My life is the worst. Hillary, why won't you help me? Her messages grew angrier and more desperate. It's because of your attitude that you're ugly, she screamed in one. Instead of learning from her mistakes, Megan continued blaming everyone but herself. As her funds dwindled, Megan had to leave her luxury apartment and move back into our old family home. There, she faced a new nightmare. Self-proclaimed relatives and so-called friends showed up daily, claiming she should share the house or let them live with her. Mentally exhausted and terrified, Megan left me voicemails twice a day, begging for help. Finally, I made up my mind to respond. Hello, I said flatly, answering her call for the first time. Megan gasped, clearly shocked to hear my voice. Hillary, help me, I hate this life. I want to live with you. Please, where should I go? No, I said firmly. Do you remember our agreement? I gave up the inheritance on the condition that you'd never contact me again. How many times have you broken that promise? I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. Please come get me. I can't stand this anymore. Please help me. Megan's pleas grew more frantic, but I didn't budge. No, the only reason I picked up was to tell you this is the last time. I'm changing my number. You won't be able to reach me again. Stop wasting your time and your money on call charges. Hillary, please. I interrupted her. You always lied to me and put me down, but now you've destroyed yourself. I'm finally free of you, and I'm happy. You should try to find a way to fix your life, too. Her screams echoed over the phone as I hung up for the last time. She may have been begging for forgiveness, but it no longer concerned me. I had fulfilled my end of the deal, renounced the inheritance, and kept my distance. Megan's ruin was her own doing. I turned off my phone, headed to a mobile shop, and changed my number. Since then, my life has flourished. I commute to work from a new, peaceful home, focus on improving my skills, and have rapidly advanced in my career. You've changed, my boss remarked one day. You're no longer weighed down by comparisons. At lunch, my colleagues noted, you used to say things like, I'm just this or I'm just that, but not anymore. You seem brighter and more confident. For the first time, I've learned to value myself without comparing myself to others. I no longer have a family, but I found contentment and happiness on my own terms. I never imagined my wedding day would be the beginning of my greatest nightmare. The moment I walked down the aisle, glowing in my carefully chosen white gown, I thought I was stepping into a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as I soon learned, are only stories. Reality is far more cruel. My husband, Ethan, had always been charming. His smile could light up a room, and his words carried a warmth that made you feel like you were the center of the universe. That's what drew me to him in the first place. But standing there at the altar, I couldn't shake the icy glances from his mother, Vivian, and his older sister, Lila. They sat in the front row, whispering to each other as if sharing some inside joke. My stomach twisted. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. The reception was lavish, Vivian's doing, of course. She loved to flaunt her wealth and influence. As I greeted the guests, I noticed how Vivian's friends looked me up and down, their smiles polite but their eyes sharp, assessing. She's lovely, one woman said to Vivian, loud enough for me to hear, but she's simple, isn't she? Vivian's response was a laugh that sent shivers down my spine. Yes, well, not everyone can be extraordinary. I clenched my fists, determined to ignore the sting. This was my wedding day. I refused to let her ruin it. But the real blow came later that night during the first dance. Ethan's family had gathered around, clapping and cheering, but their smiles were laced with mockery. As Ethan twirled me under the lights, I overheard Lila whisper to a cousin, "She doesn't belong here. She's out of her depth." The words pierced me like a knife. My dream day was unraveling. When Ethan and I finally escaped to our hotel suite, I confronted him. "Your family, they don't like me, do they?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Don't let them get to you, Kate. They're just protective." Protective? They were mocking me, Ethan. Right there in front of everyone. He kissed my forehead, his tone dismissive. "You're overthinking it. Let's just enjoy tonight." But I couldn't enjoy it. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and they would only grow in the weeks to come. Married life with Ethan was a mix of bliss and bitterness. He was sweet when we were alone, but when his family was around, he transformed into someone else entirely. Vivian's subtle jabs became a daily occurrence, always wrapped in a guise of concern. "Kate, dear," she said one evening during a family dinner, "have you thought about taking etiquette classes? It's just, well, our circles can be quite demanding, and I wouldn't want you to feel out of place." Lila smirked over her glass of wine. "Oh, Mother, don't overwhelm her. She's doing her best, after all." I looked to Ethan for support, but he only gave me a strained smile, his eyes darting away. The breaking point came during a charity gala. Vivian had insisted I attend, even though I felt like a fish out of water among the glittering gowns and polished smiles. As I stood awkwardly by the bar, I overheard Vivian speaking to a group of donors. "She's sweet," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "but honestly, I expected Ethan to choose someone more refined." Laughter erupted from the group, and my face burned with humiliation. When I confronted Ethan that night, his response was infuriating. "They don't mean anything by it," he said, brushing off my tears. "You're taking it too personally." Despite everything, I tried to fit in. I took Vivian's advice, attending etiquette classes and investing in designer clothes, hoping to earn their approval. But nothing was ever enough. Every effort I made was met with more criticism. One evening, as I sat alone in our apartment, staring at a photo from our honeymoon, something inside me snapped. Why was I bending over backward for people who clearly despised me? Why wasn't Ethan standing up for me? I realized then that I couldn't keep living like this. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. From that moment of realization, my resolve hardened. I wasn't going to let Vivian, Lila, or anyone else in Ethan's family dictate how I lived my life, or how I felt about myself. If they wanted me to fail, I would give them the fight of their lives. But I quickly learned that standing up to them would come with devastating consequences. My first act of defiance was at a family brunch Vivian hosted at her sprawling estate. The theme was old Hollywood glamour, and I arrived dressed to the nines in a sleek black gown with vintage pearls, channeling Audrey Hepburn. When I walked through the door, all heads turned, and for a moment, I thought I'd won a small victory. Vivian's smile was tight. "Oh, Kate, you made it. I wasn't sure you'd understand the theme." I returned her smile, equally icy. "I never miss an opportunity to shine." Lila snorted into her mimosa, but I ignored her. As the brunch progressed, I held my ground, participating in conversations with poise and confidence. I could see their discomfort, Vivian's forced laughter, Lila's exaggerated eye rolls, but I felt empowered for the first time. Until, of course, they retaliated. After the meal, Vivian pulled me aside, her tone sweet but her words venomous. "I know you're trying, dear, but perhaps it's best to let the more seasoned women handle the social dynamics. You wouldn't want to embarrass yourself, or Ethan." Her words stung, but I didn't let her see it. "Thank you for the advice, Vivian," I said, my voice steady. "But I think I'll manage just fine." The conflict with Vivian and Lila wasn't just between us, it seeped into my marriage. Ethan hated confrontation, and instead of supporting me, he retreated into silence. One night, after another heated dinner with his family, I confronted him. "Why won't you say anything to them?" I demanded, pacing our living room. "They humiliate me, Ethan. In front of you, in front of everyone, and you just sit there." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "What do you want me to do, Kate? They're my family, and what am I?" I shot back, my voice cracking. "Am I not your family too?" His silence was deafening. It became clear that I was on my own. Things escalated at Ethan's company gala, an event I had been dreading but couldn't avoid. Vivian and Lila were, of course, in attendance, along with the elite of the business world. I had meticulously prepared, wearing an elegant emerald gown and practicing conversation starters to hold my own. For most of the evening, I managed to avoid them. But as I stood by the buffet, chatting with one of Ethan's colleagues, I heard a familiar voice. "She's charming, isn't she?" Vivian's tone was syrupy sweet, but her words were daggers. "It's just a shame she doesn't quite understand our world." "Poor thing, she's trying so hard," Lila chimed in, her laughter sharp. "It's like watching a child play dress-up." My heart sank as I realized they were talking about me. Worse, the colleague I was speaking to excused himself awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable with the spectacle Vivian and Lila were making. I couldn't take it anymore. Turning on my heel, I marched straight to their table. "Is there something you'd like to say to me directly?" I demanded, my voice trembling but firm. The room fell silent. Vivian looked up at me with feigned surprise. "Kate, dear, what are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my hands clenched. "You've been undermining me since the day I married Ethan. I'm done pretending it doesn't bother me." Lila smirked. "Oh, sweetie, don't take things so personally. It's all in good fun." "Fun?" I echoed, my voice rising. "Tearing someone down for your own amusement is fun to you?" Before they could respond, I turned to Ethan, who had been standing frozen by the bar. "And you," I said, my voice breaking, "are you really going to just stand there and let this happen?" He looked at me helplessly, his silence cutting deeper than any insult Vivian or Lila could throw. Humiliated and furious, I left the gala, ignoring Ethan's weak protests as I stormed out. The weeks that followed were a blur of arguments and cold shoulders. Ethan tried to apologize, but his words felt hollow. The rift between us widened with each passing day. One evening, as I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone, a headline caught my eye: "Family feud at high society gala, daughter-in-law causes scene." My heart sank as I read the article, complete with quotes from anonymous attendees describing me as overly emotional and out of place. It didn't take a genius to figure out who had leaked the story. Furious, I confronted Ethan. "Your family has crossed a line," I said, shoving the article in his face. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" He looked at the article and sighed. "Kate, you shouldn't have confronted them like that. You know how they are." I stared at him, incredulous. "You're blaming me?" "They humiliated me, Ethan, publicly, and now they're spreading lies about me to the media." I'll talk to them, he said weakly, but I knew he wouldn't. For the first time, I started to wonder if I had made a mistake marrying him. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, an unexpected lifeline appeared in the form of Ethan's younger brother, Adam. Unlike the rest of the family, Adam had always been kind to me, but he mostly kept to himself, avoiding the drama that surrounded Vivian and Lila. One afternoon, he called me out of the blue. I heard about the gala, he said, his voice sympathetic. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how they treated you. It's not right. His words brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Adam, that means more than you know. You don't deserve this, Kate, he continued, and you're not alone. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. In the weeks that followed, Adam's words lingered in my mind. I had been so consumed by Vivian and Lila's hostility, by Ethan's passivity, that I hadn't considered I might have allies, even within their family. That small spark of hope was enough to keep me going, though I wasn't sure where it would lead. It started with a conversation I didn't realize I needed. Adam invited me for coffee, a rare gesture that I accepted with hesitation. We met at a cozy cafe on the edge of town, far removed from the world of high society luncheons and gala drama. I don't get it, I admitted after we'd exchanged pleasantries. Why are you sticking your neck out for me? You're Vivian's son too. Adam stirred his coffee thoughtfully. You're right, I am, but I'm also tired of seeing her treat people like pawns in her game. You're not the first person she's tried to tear down, but you're the first one who stood up to her. His words both comforted and unsettled me. I don't feel like I'm standing up to her. Most days, it feels like I'm barely holding on. That's because you're fighting alone, he said simply. You shouldn't have to. Adam's support emboldened me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Together, we began to strategize ways to reclaim my dignity and stand up to Vivian and Lila. It wasn't about vengeance, it was about drawing boundaries and demanding respect. You can't play their game, Adam advised during one of our many conversations. They'll always have the upper hand, but you can change the rules. How? I asked, skeptical but intrigued. By showing them they can't control you. Start by building your own network, your own reputation. Show them, and Ethan, that you don't need their approval. It was a daunting idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had been so focused on fitting into their world that I had lost sight of my own strengths. It was time to change that. The first step was reconnecting with who I was before I met Ethan. I dusted off my old portfolio and began freelancing as a graphic designer, a career I had put on hold after our wedding. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt my confidence, landing a few small but meaningful clients. Vivian and Lila, of course, caught wind of my efforts and wasted no time belittling them. Oh, how quaint, Lila remarked at a dinner party. A little hobby to keep you busy. I smiled sweetly, refusing to take the bait. Actually, it's a full-time career, and it's going quite well. Thank you. Their barbs didn't sting as much anymore. I was learning to see them for what they were, insecure, manipulative women who thrived on making others feel small. But the real turning point came during yet another family gathering, a charity event Vivian was hosting at her estate. Adam had encouraged me to attend, not to prove anything to them but to myself. The evening started predictably enough, with Vivian and Lila playing their usual games of thinly veiled insults and backhanded compliments. But things escalated when Vivian, in a theatrical show of generosity, announced a sizable donation to the charity on behalf of the entire family. She then turned to me with a saccharine smile. Kate, dear, would you like to say a few words on behalf of Ethan and yourself? It was a trap, and I knew it. If I declined, I'd look ungrateful. If I accepted, I'd be stepping into her spotlight. But this time, I was ready. I took the microphone, my heart pounding but my voice steady. Thank you, Vivian, for your generous donation, I began. It's truly inspiring to see such support for a cause so close to my heart. I paused, meeting her gaze. In fact, Ethan and I have also made a contribution, one that reflects our personal values and priorities. Because at the end of the day, what truly matters is not just the size of the donation, but the sincerity behind it. The room erupted in polite applause, but the look on Vivian's face was priceless. For the first time, I had outmaneuvered her on her own turf. After the event, Ethan pulled me aside, his expression unreadable. Where did that come from? He asked, not unkindly. What do you mean? I replied, feigning innocence. You were so composed. Confident. It's not like you. I bristled at his words, but chose to see the silver lining. Maybe it's who I've always been, Ethan. You just haven't noticed. To my surprise, he didn't argue. Instead, he seemed thoughtful, almost introspective. It was the first time in months I felt like he was truly seeing me. In the days following the event, I continued to focus on my work and personal growth, refusing to let Vivian and Lila's antics consume me. Adam remained a steadfast ally, offering encouragement and advice when I needed it most. But the real breakthrough came when Ethan finally confronted his mother. "I've been thinking about what you said at the event," he told me one evening. "And you're right. I've let them control us too much. That stops now." Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time, it felt like we were on the same team. Vivian and Lila didn't change overnight, of course. But they began to sense that their grip on Ethan, and me, was loosening. I stopped engaging with their drama, and Ethan started standing up for me in small but meaningful ways. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Vivian's control didn't dissipate easily. True to form, she staged one last attempt to reassert her dominance. She orchestrated a lavish gala under the guise of celebrating Ethan's business success, but used it as an opportunity to showcase her influence over her family. As the night unfolded, it became clear that I was the centerpiece of her unspoken narrative. She made subtle jabs about my career, my background, and even our marriage. Lila, ever her mother's loyal soldier, followed suit. But this time, I didn't crumble. "I have to hand it to you, Vivian," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You know how to command attention. But I think it's time we all stop pretending that your way is the only way." The room fell silent, the weight of my words settling over the crowd. Vivian's eyes narrowed, her composure slipping for just a moment before she recovered with a brittle smile. "I only want what's best for my son," she replied, her tone icy. "And so do I said. "But what's best for him, and for us, is to build a life on our terms, not yours." To my surprise and relief, Ethan stepped forward, his hand gently resting on my shoulder. "Kate's right," he said, his voice steady. "It's time I stop letting you dictate how we live our lives. I love you, Mom, but we're building something together, and we need space to do that." Vivian looked as though she'd been struck. For years, she had wielded her authority without question, and now her son, the one she'd always counted on, was drawing a line. The power dynamic shifted in that moment, and everyone in the room felt it. Life didn't transform overnight, but the changes were palpable. Vivian and Lila, while still formidable, no longer had the same hold over us. They tested boundaries occasionally, but Ethan and I held firm, presenting a united front. My career flourished as I took on bigger projects and found a supportive community of peers and mentors. Ethan, inspired by my independence, started exploring ways to step out of his mother's shadow in his own professional life. Our relationship grew stronger too. We learned to communicate better, to lean on each other rather than pulling away when things got tough. The challenges we had faced together became the foundation for something deeper and more resilient. Adam remained a trusted confidant, offering wisdom and humor when we needed it most. He even helped bridge the gap between us and Vivian, softening her sharp edges over time. "She'll never admit it," Adam told me one day, "but she respects you. You stood up to her in a way no one else ever has." It wasn't the kind of victory I had once imagined. There were no dramatic apologies or sudden transformations. But I had learned that true strength didn't come from forcing others to change. It came from staying true to myself, no matter the opposition. One afternoon, as I worked on a new design project in the home office Ethan and I had renovated together, I paused to take it all in. The sunlight streaming through the windows, the hum of Ethan's laughter from the next room as he played with our dog, the quiet peace of knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be. The journey had been messy, painful, and at times overwhelming. But it had also been worth it. I had found my voice, my purpose, and a love that was stronger for the trials it had endured. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I've come to a harsh realization: Owen lacks responsibility and compassion. It's clear now that I have to take decisive action. I've decided to stay in this house with my parents, and Owen will need to leave. Since we got married, Owen has depended on me for everything. Despite my efforts, and the $4,000 I pay in monthly rent, he's now trying to force me out of my own home. This is my breaking point. 4 months. I've contemplated divorce, but Owen's selfishness and dismissive remarks have solidified my decision. I told him firmly, I will leave this house. Yes, but for now, you need to go. His response? A shrug and a flippant, fine, I'll be out tonight and back tomorrow. Just make sure you're gone by then. The nerve of him. Don't you even care to check what I might take with me? I asked. He replied without hesitation, don't touch my equipment. Do whatever you want with the rest of the stuff. His dismissive attitude left me stunned but also resolute. If he's giving me free rein to manage the household items, I might as well use the opportunity wisely. Perhaps it's time Owen faces the consequences of his choices. I've already started planning, if necessary. I'll hire a removal service to pack up everything I care about. Owen might finally learn what it's like to deal with the aftermath of his actions. Let me give you some context. I'm Erica, 31 years old, a graduate of a prestigious program, and a researcher at a well-known company. My career is stable, and I earn enough to afford a $4,000 a month apartment. On paper, my life seems ideal, a good job, a nice home, and a family. I have a husband, Owen, and a son, Sam. From the outside, it might look like I have it all. But appearances can be deceiving. That $4,000 rent is a significant strain on our budget, even with my decent salary. The real issue, however, is Owen's refusal to contribute meaningfully. At 32, he's still chasing a dream of becoming a musician. I once admired his ambition. In his early days, he performed at events and small venues, and his passion was inspiring. But that was years ago. The income he makes from part-time jobs is erratic, and his dream of making it big feels more like an illusion. Meanwhile, I've been left to shoulder all the responsibility. When I voice my concerns about the financial burden, Owen dismisses them. You sound like an old woman. He scoffs. I'm not complaining, I'm stating facts. I've been patient, supportive, and understanding, but my patience has run out. I've carried this marriage and this family long enough. Owen's refusal to change has forced me to make a choice. Divorce is no longer just an idea, it's the solution. I deserve a life where I'm not constantly worrying about rent or being belittled for speaking the truth. Sam and I deserve better. It's time to prioritize my well-being and let go of a relationship that only holds me back. When I was younger, I saw Owen's potential. He seemed full of promise, and I believed in his dreams. When I got pregnant, he promised to work hard for our future. I was 20 when we got married, and I thought he would let go of his music career to focus on building a life with us. At first, I felt guilty for questioning his choices. I didn't want him to feel like he had to abandon his dreams entirely, but after Sam was born, nothing changed. Owen kept chasing his music dreams, working part-time jobs, and acting as if he had no other obligations. I couldn't take it anymore. One day, I confronted him. How long do you plan to keep working part-time? You're almost 32. People your age are building careers. I have my own way of living, he replied, dismissively. Don't compare me to others. His words infuriated me. Your way of living doesn't mean anything if you're not contributing. Start helping with household expenses. When I become famous, he shot back. I'll make up for the money I'm not earning now. Stop dreaming and face reality. I snapped. He had no answer. Eventually, he picked up another part-time job, but it wasn't enough. Despite everything, he kept talking about his dreams. You're being too noisy, he'd say. Times have changed. There are so many ways to succeed without signing with an agency. I'm making progress, even if it's slow. It's exhausting. His band broke up years ago, and the other members moved on. Some got married, others found steady jobs. Owen clings to the past. He calls giving up on dreams pathetic, but I see it differently. Sacrificing a dream to support your family is meaningful and responsible. Is that so wrong? When I was pregnant, Owen promised to work hard for our child. What he really meant was he'd keep working hard at his music career. I kept hoping he'd change, but now I see it's not going to happen. Did you buy expensive clothes again? I asked recently, frustrated. Looking good is important for my job, he replied. His job? His dream? His excuses? They're not enough anymore. It's time for me to move on. I'm ready to rebuild a life of stability and happiness for myself and my son, without Owen holding us back. I couldn't believe it. Owen hasn't made a single dollar from his music career, yet he talks as if he's already a star. It's been 11 years since our son, Sam, was born, and Owen is still working part-time jobs. At nearly 32, He spent years chasing dreams that have yielded no tangible success. Instead of contributing to the household, he spends money on expensive clothes and music equipment. I wish you'd spend less on those things and help with the household expenses, I told him. You can't satisfy hunger with pretense. These things are necessary for me, he snapped back. His attitude fuels our arguments. We try to discuss these issues privately, away from Sam, but in a small apartment. It's impossible to keep our voices from carrying. Sam often overhears, and that's one reason we've considered moving to a bigger place. As our son grows, the apartment only feels more cramped. Sam's 11 now, and this place is too small, I told Owen. Should we move? Yeah, he said nonchalantly. This was your house originally anyway, right? You lived here alone before we got married. Do you have a problem with that? I asked. It's not a problem, he replied, but I'd like to move to a bigger place, maybe a high-rise condo. That would be cool. And who's going to pay for it? I pressed. I'll help with the household expenses, he said, as if it were a great concession. You handle the rent, and I'll cover electricity, gas, and groceries. Please, I really want to live in a high-rise condo. With my salary, it was possible to afford the rent, and his offer to help, even in a small way, gave me a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the push he needed to start valuing money and taking responsibility. Okay, I agreed. I'll look for a place, but since I'm paying the rent, I get to choose where we live. Deal? Deal, he said eagerly. As long as it's a high-rise condo, I'm fine with whatever you pick. I hoped this move would mark a fresh start for our family, but things didn't go as planned. A year after moving into the condo, Owen is still chasing his music dreams, still making excuses, and still breaking promises. Hey, the gas bill came, I reminded him one day. Make sure you pay it before it's debited from my account. I'll give it to you next time, he said casually. When is next time? You always say that, but you never pay, I said, frustration boiling over. Do you think money isn't important? I'm asking for the bare minimum to cover our bills. Why do I have to keep scolding you about this? All you ever do is fuss about money, he snapped. His dismissiveness left me fuming. Owen promised to help with the bills, but it's clear his promises were empty. Thankfully, I set up direct payments for utilities to avoid overdue charges. Otherwise, Owen would likely neglect them entirely. Occasionally, he leaves small amounts of money behind, like the $100 bill I once found on the living room table. For a moment, I thought maybe he was embarrassed to hand it to me directly. Perhaps it was his way of showing he cared, but then I realized I was wrong. He hadn't paid his share of the electricity bill that month either. I do pay sometimes, don't I? Owen argued when I confronted him. It felt like he only handed over small amounts to soothe his conscience. Then there were the lies. One day, he asked me, I want to take my parents on a trip. Can you lend me some money? How much do you need? I asked. $100 should be enough, he replied. I gave him the money, but deep down, I knew it wasn't for a trip. Owen has a habit of lying when he wants pocket money. He likely used it to treat his friends or buy something frivolous. Meanwhile, I'm left paying $4,000 a month for rent. I thought moving into this condo might inspire Owen to take work more seriously, but he continues to let me down. I can't save for the future under these conditions. I'd rather use the money for something meaningful, like Sam's education or our retirement. I've considered divorce before, but now it's becoming a serious option. Then Owen said something that made my decision crystal clear. Hey, we have an unused room, right? I was thinking of clearing it out and making it a space for my parents, he said. A room for your parents? Are you saying they'd move in with us? I asked, surprised. My parents are getting older. We can't just leave them alone, he said, trying to sound noble. I know Owen well enough to see through him. He talks big but rarely follows through. Who does he think pays the $4,000 rent? I also cover all living expenses and our son's education. The idea of taking on the responsibility of his parents as well was unacceptable. I'm against it, I replied firmly. Don't answer so quickly. Think about it for a while, he urged. I have thought about it, and my answer is no, I said again. Why are you being so stubborn? What's wrong with taking care of my parents? Are you telling me to abandon them? You're heartless, he snapped. To an outsider, I might sound selfish, but the problem isn't his parents, it's Owen. If they moved in, I know I'd be the one taking care of them, just as I handle everything else in this household. I will not live with your parents, I said resolutely. Owen glared at me. Fine, I'll live here with them. You need to leave. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Since we got married, Owen has been entirely dependent on me, and now he's trying to kick me out of the house I pay for. His selfishness and irresponsibility made my decision clear. Fine, I said coldly, I'll leave. Good, pack your things and get out quickly. I'll be back tomorrow evening, make sure you're gone by then. Are you sure you don't want to check what I might take with me? I asked. Don't touch my equipment, do whatever you want with the rest, he said before storming out. With Owen gone, a strange sense of freedom washed over me. As I stood there, my 15-year-old son, Sam, stepped out of his room. Mom, I'll help you pack, I'll go with you too, he said softly, trying to comfort me. His words broke my heart. Whenever Owen and I fought, Sam would quietly retreat to avoid the tension. As a parent, it crushed me to see my child feel like he had to tiptoe around us. Where should we start, Mom? He asked. Start with your own things, I said. I have something else to handle. I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Owen was about to get a little shock of his own. As I grabbed my phone and made a call, I prepared for the next step in our escape. Hello, I'm sorry for the last-minute request, but could you help us tomorrow? I asked. Once everything essential was packed, my son and I left for a business hotel to figure out our next move. It wasn't ideal, but it felt like the first step toward reclaiming our lives. That evening, as expected, Owen called. I placed my phone on the table, exchanged a glance with Sam, and answered. What's going on? Where are you? Owen's voice was loud and agitated. What do you mean? Is there a problem? I asked calmly. All my clothes and equipment are here, but everything else is gone. Where's the table? The fridge? Did you take them? His panic was palpable. No, I replied. I called a junk removal service. By now, it's probably all been burned. Sam, sitting nearby, chimed in. Owen fell silent for a moment, likely shocked to realize Sam was still with me. What do you mean, burned? He finally sputtered. The furniture and appliances are marital property. You told me I could do whatever I wanted with everything except your equipment, so I did, I said. How am I supposed to live now? He yelled. If you need furniture, buy new ones. In the meantime, use your amp as a chair or wrap your guitar in a towel for a pillow, I replied, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. That's not funny, how could you do something so nasty? He snapped. We're getting a divorce, I said firmly. Yes, I understand, he replied, trying to sound unaffected. I knew he thought this was just another argument, but I had made up my mind. His response only strengthened my resolve. Good, I said, we'll talk about the details later. Since you're planning to live in the house with your parents, I'll go to the real estate agent tomorrow to update the contract. Owen hesitated. If you change the contract to my name, the divorce will be final. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice trembling. Yes, I said coldly, making it clear there was no turning back. His pride wouldn't let him backtrack, even though I could tell he regretted how far things had gone. A few days later, we went to the real estate office to finalize the condo arrangements. I ended my part of the contract with ease, but Owen hit a wall when he tried to transfer it to his name. What? The rent is $4,500? His face went pale. He had no idea how expensive it was, because he'd never asked. He assumed he could rely on his parents to help cover the cost, but their retirement income made that impossible. You've been paying this much every month? He asked in disbelief. Yes, I replied, and I've been covering everything else too, because you never contributed. I can't afford this, he admitted. Of course not, I said, you wouldn't even pass the screening. The real estate agent confirmed this, and Owen sat in stunned silence. So, what do I do now? He finally asked. If you can't sign the contract, you'll have to leave, I said matter-of-factly. Owen's face reddened, a mix of anger and humiliation. Reluctantly, he left the office, realizing he was completely out of his depth. After the divorce was finalized, Owen's life fell apart. When I informed his parents about the situation, they decided to stop supporting him until he found stable work. Unable to rely on them, Owen struggled to rent even a small apartment. His freelancing income was too unstable to sustain a music career, and at 32, his chances of finding a regular job were slim. Meanwhile, I found a new apartment for Sam and me. The rent is much more affordable, and I can finally use my income for meaningful things like our future. While I don't fault anyone for chasing their dreams, I found peace in creating a stable, happy life for my son. That's what truly matters to me now. Life was not extraordinary, but it was ours. My husband, James, and I had been married for 8 years. We had a modest home, a small but steady savings account, and a routine that felt comforting. James worked as a mid-level manager in a growing tech company, and I handled freelance design work from home while taking care of our 6-year-old daughter, Emma. James often talked about his dream of becoming a director at his company, a goal he pursued with relentless ambition. I supported him wholeheartedly. Late nights at the office? I made sure dinner was ready when he returned. Weekend networking events? I juggled Emma's schedule so he could attend. James was the provider, the head of the family, or so I thought. One evening, James came home earlier than usual, an excited glint in his eye. "Big things are happening, honey," he said, kissing my forehead. "This might finally be our break." I smiled at him, feeling his enthusiasm radiate through the room. "Our break?" I teased. He nodded. "Yeah, our break. Once this next step goes through, we'll be set for life." Though he didn't share many details, I assumed it was another career opportunity. I had no reason to doubt him. James was a man who worked hard for everything he had. I trusted him completely. The first sign of trouble came a few weeks later. James started receiving strange phone calls late at night. He'd step outside to answer them, his voice low and tense. When I asked, he brushed it off as work stress and assured me that everything was fine. Soon after, I noticed other changes. James became irritable, snapping over minor things like misplaced keys or a delayed dinner. Our once happy home grew quieter, the tension so thick it felt like walking on eggshells. One afternoon, Emma brought me the mail, her tiny hands clutching a thick envelope. "Mommy, this looks important," she said, her big blue eyes watching as I opened it. It was a letter from the bank, addressed to me. The words blurred together in a haze of disbelief as I read the contents. Loan confirmation, $1 million approved under the name of Claire Wilson. My heart pounded. I'd never applied for such a loan. Why would I? We didn't need $1 million, and even if we did, I certainly wouldn't take it out without a discussion. I stormed into the living room, clutching the letter. "James," I called, my voice shaking. He appeared in the doorway, his face pale as he saw the paper in my hand. "What's this?" I demanded. He hesitated, then sighed heavily. It's for us, Claire, for the future." I had to take the loan to invest in something big. Without telling me? I shot back, anger bubbling to the surface. "You put my name on this without even asking?" James looked away, avoiding my gaze. "It's complicated. Trust me, it'll pay off. You won't have to worry about a thing." But I couldn't shake the unease. Something about his explanation didn't add up. The way he avoided eye contact, the evasiveness in his tone, it wasn't like him. In the days that followed, the weight of that loan pressed down on me like a storm cloud. I tried to dig deeper, asking James more questions, but his answers grew curt and dismissive. Then, one evening, I overheard a conversation that shattered my world. James was in his office, talking on the phone. I paused outside the door, the sound of his voice sharp and agitated. "No, I told you, she doesn't know the whole story yet," he hissed. I had to use her name. My credit wouldn't have been enough. "Just give me more time." My stomach churned. James had lied to me, about everything. Not only had he taken out a massive loan without my knowledge, but he'd also done it because his own finances were in shambles. He was using me as his scapegoat. That night, I confronted him. "I heard you," I said, standing in the kitchen while he poured himself a drink. He froze, his hand tightening around the glass. "Heard what?" "The phone call. You lied to me, James. You're in debt, aren't you? That loan wasn't for us. It was to cover your mistakes." James turned to face me, his expression hardening. "Claire, you don't understand how business works. I had no choice." "You had a choice," I snapped. "You could have told me the truth instead of dragging me into your mess." His response was chilling. "Don't make this a bigger deal than it needs to be," he said coldly. "You'll thank me when everything works out." But I couldn't just brush it aside. That night, as I lay awake, I realized the man I thought I knew, the man I trusted, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. In the days after confronting James, the air between us grew colder. Every glance, every word, was laced with tension. My trust in him, once unshakable, now felt like a fragile thread ready to snap. But I didn't have the luxury to dwell on emotions. I had to act. The loan was in my name, and if James's so-called plan fell apart, I'd be the one left to deal with the fallout. One morning, while James was at work, I decided to investigate. I sifted through his desk drawers and filing cabinets, looking for any clue about what he'd gotten us into. At first, all I found were old bills and office supplies. Then, tucked away in the back of a drawer, I discovered a folder marked private. Inside were documents that made my heart sink. Bank statements showed staggering withdrawals from our savings, Money I'd assumed was still there. Worse, there were contracts for what appeared to be a risky business investment. The terms were clear: if the venture failed, the entire debt would fall on me. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. James hadn't just lied, he'd gambled with our future. That evening, I waited for James to come home, the folder sitting on the coffee table like a bomb waiting to explode. When he walked through the door, his face hardened the moment he saw it. "What's this, James?" I demanded, my voice steady but laced with anger. "When were you planning to tell me you emptied our savings and tied me to your failed business scheme?" He rubbed his temples, his frustration evident. "Claire, I told you, I'm fixing everything. You don't understand how these things work." "Don't patronize me," I snapped, my voice breaking. "You put us at risk, James. You put Emma at risk. How could you do this to your family?" His expression shifted to something colder, almost dismissive. "I didn't think you'd get it," he said, turning away. "You're always so focused on playing it safe." The word stung. Was that how he saw me? As some obstacle to his ambitions? Over the next few weeks, things only got worse. James spent more and more time away from home, claiming he was handling the situation, but I wasn't convinced. His evasiveness, his growing distance, it felt like he was slipping away entirely. One evening, I overheard another phone call. This time, James wasn't hiding his tone of desperation. "I don't care what it takes," he said, his voice cracking. "I need more time, just don't let it get back to her." Who was he talking to, and what was he so afraid I'd find out? The breaking point came when a stranger showed up at our door. He was a sharply dressed man, carrying a briefcase and wearing an expression that was all business. "Mrs. Wilson?" he asked. "Yes? I'm here on behalf of Mr. Thompson. He's concerned about the delays in your loan payments and wanted to ensure you were aware of the terms." The blood drained from my face. "What delays?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man frowned, flipping through his papers. "Your payments are already 2 months overdue. If they're not resolved soon, the matter will escalate to legal proceedings." I stood there, stunned. James hadn't just lied, he'd been defaulting on the loan while pretending everything was under control. That night, when James finally came home, I was waiting for him, the weight of the stranger's words pressing down on me like a vice. "Who's Mr. Thompson?" I asked, my tone icy. James froze, his face pale. "Why are you asking about him?" "Because his representative came by today. Apparently, my loan is overdue. Care to explain?" He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Claire, I didn't want to worry you. I'm working on it." "Stop lying," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "You've been lying to me for months, James. I don't even know who you are anymore." For the first time, he looked genuinely defeated. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I thought I could fix it before you found out." But his confession did little to ease the storm inside me. James had betrayed my trust, jeopardized our future, and dragged me into a mess I hadn't asked for. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized I couldn't rely on James to fix this. If I wanted to protect Emma and myself, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. Little did I know, my decision would set off a chain of events that would change everything. The morning after my confrontation with James, I woke up with a sense of resolve I hadn't felt in months. I wasn't going to sit around and let this disaster spiral further out of control. Emma and I deserved better. If James couldn't or wouldn't fix things, I would. I started by calling the loan officer. "Mr. Thompson, I needed answers, and I wasn't going to rely on James's evasions anymore." "Mrs. Wilson," Mr. Thompson said when I reached him. "It's unusual for us to hear directly from clients in this situation. Your husband has been the one managing the account." "Well, I'm managing it now," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can you send me the full details of the loan agreement and any outstanding payments?" He hesitated for a moment. "Of course, but I must warn you, some of the terms your husband agreed to are quite steep." When the documents arrived later that day, I could hardly believe what I was reading. The interest rate alone was astronomical, and the penalties for defaulting were even worse. James had effectively tied us to a financial noose. I spent the next few days combing through every piece of paperwork, trying to find a way out. At the same time, I started researching local legal aid and financial advisors. I was determined to find someone who could help me untangle this mess. That's when I came across the name of a lawyer who specialized in cases like mine. Her name was Margaret Hayes, and she had a reputation for being relentless in protecting her clients. I made an appointment and walked into her office, with all my documents in hand. Margaret was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her early 40s, with an air of confidence that immediately put me at ease. "Let me get this straight," she said after reviewing the papers. "Your husband took out this loan in your name without fully disclosing the terms to you?" "Yes," I said, feeling a mix of anger and shame. I didn't know what I was signing. "He said it was for us, our family." She nodded thoughtfully. "It's not uncommon for people to trust their spouses implicitly, but this is serious. The terms are predatory, and if we can prove you were misled, there may be a way to challenge this legally." Her words were a lifeline, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sliver of hope. While Margaret worked on the legal front, I threw myself into finding a way to bring in extra income. I had left my job years ago to focus on raising Emma, but now, desperate times called for desperate measures. I started applying to every job I could find, from administrative positions to part-time retail work. Rejection after rejection came in, each one a blow to my already fragile confidence. One day, after yet another fruitless job hunt, I sat on a park bench with Emma. She played on the swings, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around us. Watching her laugh and squeal as she soared higher, I felt a pang of guilt. She deserved stability, happiness, things I wasn't sure I could give her anymore. That's when I noticed a familiar face across the park. It was Sarah, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. We'd drifted apart after high school, but back then, she'd always been the one to dream big. "Claire," she said, approaching with a look of surprise, "is that you?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "It's been a long time, Sarah." We spent the next hour catching up. When I told her about my struggles, she listened intently. "You know," she said, "I just started working at a new company. They're always looking for reliable people, and I could put in a good word for you." It felt like fate. Sarah gave me the details, and by the end of the week, I had an interview lined up. The job wasn't glamorous, it was an entry-level administrative role, but it was something. The office was bustling, and the pace was demanding, but I threw myself into the work with everything I had. One day, as I was sorting through a stack of paperwork, I overheard two senior managers talking about a major upcoming project. They were brainstorming ideas, but seemed stuck. "Excuse me," I said, hesitantly interrupting. "I couldn't help but overhear. Maybe you could try this approach?" They looked at me with surprise, but one of them nodded. "That's actually a great idea," he said. From that day on, they began to notice me. Slowly but surely, I started earning their trust and respect. Meanwhile, Margaret called with good news. "We filed a formal complaint about the loan," she said. "If this goes to court, there's a strong chance we can argue that the agreement was predatory. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was progress." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had some control over my life again. But just as things were starting to look up, James threw another curveball. One evening, he came home with an announcement that left me speechless. "I've decided to sell the house," he said casually, as if it were no big deal. "What?" I said, my voice rising. "You can't just decide that on your own, James. This is our home. It's not up for debate," he said coldly. "We need the money, and this is the only way." His words felt like a slap in the face. Selling the house meant uprooting Emma, destroying the one stable thing she had left. That night, as I sat in the empty living room, I realized that James wasn't going to stop. If I wanted to protect Emma and myself, I'd have to find a way to stand up to him once and for all. While I was watching TV, my husband stormed in, his face darkening with rage after my mother-in-law whispered something to him. Without warning, he shouted, "Why are you wasting time?" and smashed the TV, my father's treasured gift, on my head. Blood streamed down as I pleaded for help, but he showed no mercy. Dragging me by my hair, he hurled me out of the house, leaving me trembling in the cold. Shaking and desperate, I called my brother, Daniel. When he arrived, the nightmare only deepened. What followed was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. My name is Harper Collins, and this is the story I never thought I'd live to tell, a journey through love, betrayal, and finding strength amidst unimaginable pain. 3 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be recounting this, I wouldn't have believed them. Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? It all began when I met Jonathan Carter. At 26, I was living in Seattle, working as a graphic designer. My life was simple, steady, until Jonathan walked in. He was a 30-year-old banker, effortlessly charming and attentive, making me feel like the most important person in the world. Our whirlwind romance was filled with candlelit dinners, waterfront walks, and long conversations about our dreams. 6 months later, when he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. Friends called us the perfect couple, and I believed them, but perfection is often an illusion. After the wedding, we moved into a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood. It felt like a dream come true. I poured myself into building our life together, cooking Jonathan's favorite meals and making our home warm and inviting. He worked long hours, and though I missed him, I told myself it was for our future. The cracks began to show when his mother, Patricia, moved in a few months after the wedding. Officially, she was there to help out, but her presence quickly revealed itself as controlling. A retired schoolteacher in her late 50s, Patricia carried an air of authority. She criticized everything, how I managed the house, dressed, and even cooked. Despite my efforts to get along, nothing pleased her. Worse, Jonathan always sided with her. "Mom's just trying to help," he'd say dismissively. One night, after a long day of chores, I settled on the sofa to watch TV. It was a small comfort, reminding me of my late father. The TV had been his gift to me, and it brought a sense of peace. That evening, Jonathan came home late, looking tired but greeting me with a brief smile. For a moment, I hoped for a calm night. Then Patricia appeared, whispering something in his ear. His expression shifted instantly, his eyes cold and angry. "Get up," he barked. "Go to the kitchen and make me a fresh meal." Confused, I replied, "Dinner is ready. I kept it warm for you." "I don't want that," he snapped. "I want something fresh, now." Exhausted, I hesitated. "Jonathan, I've been on my feet all day, can't you?" Before I could finish, he erupted. "How dare you talk back to me?" He crossed the room in a fury, grabbing the TV, my father's TV. He lifted it above his head and slammed it down. The corner struck me, and pain exploded through my skull. I crumpled to the floor, blood trickling as shock paralyzed me. "Maybe this will teach you to obey me," he growled. Patricia stood nearby, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. "You don't deserve to live here if you can't respect us," she sneered. Bleeding and trembling, I begged for help, but they were merciless. Jonathan dragged me to the door and shoved me outside into the cold night. With nowhere else to go, I called Daniel. When he answered, I broke down. "Daniel, please, I need help." "I'm coming," he said firmly. "Where are you?" When he arrived, his face was a mix of worry and fury. He helped me into his car and drove straight to the hospital. "We're going to fix this," he said, gripping the wheel tightly. "He's not getting away with this." As the doctor tended to my wounds, a flicker of hope emerged. I didn't have to endure this anymore. This was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I would fight for myself, no matter the cost. I hesitated, unsure where to begin, but I knew I had to tell Daniel everything. Taking a deep breath, I started from the beginning, recounting every instance of Patricia's interference, Jonathan's growing coldness, and my desperate attempts to please them, hoping things would improve. Finally, I described the horrifying moment when Jonathan smashed the TV on my head. Daniel listened intently, his fists clenched and jaw tight. By the time I finished, he was seething. "He's a monster," Daniel said, his voice low and full of rage. "And his mother is no better. Harper, you can't go back there, ever." "I know," I whispered, tears streaming down my face, "but what can I do? They've made it clear I don't belong there. I don't even have my belongings." "Forget your things," Daniel said firmly. "What matters is your safety. We'll figure the rest out. But first, we're going to make sure they pay for what they've done to you." I nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone. Daniel was my rock, and I knew he wouldn't let me face this battle on my own. Over the next few days, I stayed with Daniel, trying to recover both physically and emotionally. He helped me file for divorce, a daunting but liberating process. Cutting ties with Jonathan felt like reclaiming a part of myself I had lost. Yet, as freeing as it wasn't enough. Anger and humiliation burned inside me. I wanted justice. One evening, as I sat in Daniel's living room, I said, "I want to do more than just leave him. I want to expose him for what he really is." Daniel's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "What do you mean?" "I mean he's not the man he pretends to be," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I've always had this feeling he's hiding something, the late hours, the unexplained phone calls. It doesn't add up." Daniel nodded slowly. "You might be right. If he's hiding something, we'll find it. Let's dig deeper." That's when we decided to hire a private investigator. Daniel found Jack Lewis, a seasoned professional with a reputation for uncovering the truth. When we met with Jack, I explained my suspicions about Jonathan's activities at the bank. Jack listened carefully, took detailed notes, and promised to begin investigating immediately. The waiting was agonizing. Every day, I wondered what Jack would uncover. Part of me worried I was overreacting, but another part, the part that had endured Jonathan's lies, knew there was something dark beneath the surface. 2 weeks later, Jack called. "I've found something," he said. "Can we meet in person?" My heart pounded as Daniel and I drove to Jack's office. When we arrived, Jack laid out the evidence he had gathered. The truth was worse than I had imagined. Jonathan wasn't just controlling, he was a criminal. He had been embezzling money from the bank, laundering it through fake accounts, and funneling it into offshore holdings. Jack presented documents, account statements, and surveillance photos. It was undeniable. I stared at the evidence, my mind reeling. I knew he was hiding something. I said softly, "This is huge," Daniel said, his voice filled with determination. "We're taking this to the authorities." Jack nodded. "You should, but be careful. People like Jonathan don't react well when they're cornered." A chill ran down my spine, but I knew Jack was right. Jonathan was dangerous, and this was no longer just about me. His actions had hurt others, and I couldn't let him continue. The next day, Daniel and I went to the police with Jack's evidence. Detective Rebecca Hayes, the officer assigned to the case, listened carefully as we presented everything. "This is solid," she said, flipping through the files. "We'll start an investigation immediately." Leaving the station, I felt a mix of fear, relief, and empowerment. For so long, I had felt trapped, helpless. Now, I was fighting back, and for the first time in a long time, I believed I could win. The days after meeting Detective Hayes were a blur of nervous energy. The police took over the investigation, and I anxiously awaited updates. Jack's words echoed in my mind. "Jonathan is dangerous." I tried to stay busy, throwing myself into anything that could distract me. Daniel, as always, was my rock, offering constant support, but even his reassurances couldn't fully quell my fears. I knew that once Jonathan discovered the investigation, there would be no turning back. About a week later, Detective Hayes called us in. When we arrived, she gestured for us to sit. "We've made significant progress," she said, opening a folder on her desk. "Thanks to the evidence your investigator provided, we've confirmed Jonathan is involved in a large-scale money laundering operation. He's been embezzling funds for over 2 years, using shell companies to cover his tracks. The scope of his crimes is massive." Hearing it spelled out left me breathless. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice shaky. "We've built a strong case against him," Detective Hayes replied. "We're monitoring his movements and preparing to make an arrest. But you need to be careful. Once he realizes the net is closing, he might try to contact you, or worse." I nodded, gripping the edge of my chair. "I won't let him get to me," I said, though deep down, I was terrified. As we left the station, Daniel turned to me. "You're handling this incredibly well, Harper." For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of pride. I was fighting back, and I wasn't going to stop until justice was served. The weight of everything settled on me as I sat in Daniel's living room, staring out the window. My thoughts drifted back to the beginning, when Jonathan had held my hand, promised me happiness, and made me believe in a future together. How could the same man who once vowed to love and protect me turn into someone who destroyed everything we had, smashed a TV over my head, and embezzled millions? The betrayal was unfathomable, but instead of breaking me, it steeled my resolve. He had taken enough. Now, he had to face the consequences. The days leading to Jonathan's arrest were tense. I couldn't stop imagining how he would react. Would he lash out or play innocent? A part of me dreaded the confrontation, but a stronger part, one I barely recognized, wanted to see him fall. When Detective Hayes called to inform me that Jonathan had been taken into custody, I felt a rush of emotions. "He didn't resist," she said, "but he's claiming innocence, saying it's all a misunderstanding." "Of course he is," I replied bitterly. It was so like Jonathan to paint himself as the victim. Still, knowing he was behind bars, even temporarily, gave me a sense of safety I hadn't felt in months. Preparing for the trial was grueling. Memories of Jonathan haunted me, his disdainful glares, the nights I cried myself to sleep, and the moment he threw me out, bleeding and broken. But those memories, as painful as they were, strengthened me. I was determined to stand up, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever felt powerless. The day of the trial came quickly. The courtroom, with its high ceilings and somber atmosphere, was intimidating. I sat next to Daniel, clutching his hand as Jonathan was brought in. He looked calm, even smug, as if he believed he could manipulate his way out of this. But as the prosecution laid out the evidence, documents, surveillance photos, and Jack's testimony, his composure faltered. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand on shaky legs, but spoke with a steady heart. I recounted everything, the abuse, the lies, and the night he smashed the TV over my head. My voice wavered at times, but I didn't stop. I refused to let him silence me again. Jonathan's defense tried to paint me as a bitter ex-wife, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. By the end of the trial, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that he was guilty. The judge's verdict was swift. Jonathan was convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. As the gavel struck, a wave of relief washed over me. Jonathan couldn't hurt me anymore. Walking out of the courthouse with Daniel, the sun shone brightly, but I still felt the weight of everything sinking in. "You did it, Harper," Daniel said, his voice full of pride. "You stood up to him." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Moving forward wasn't easy. The scars, both physical and emotional, remained, and there were nights when I woke up reliving his violence. But each day, I reminded myself of my strength. I had survived. Reclaiming my independence became a crucial part of my healing. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in downtown Seattle. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a space free from Jonathan's shadow. Work became another refuge. Pouring myself into design projects helped rebuild my confidence. My boss, always supportive, gave me opportunities to grow, and with each success, I proved to myself that I was capable. Through it all, Daniel remained by my side, my constant source of strength. Whether he was bringing groceries or simply sitting with me, his presence reminded me that I wasn't alone. One day, I came across a photo from my wedding. In it, Jonathan smiled at me, his arm wrapped around my waist. I stared at it, trying to reconcile the man in the photo with the monster he became. Finally, I tore it in half and threw it away. It felt symbolic, like I was finally letting go of the version of him I had once loved. Jonathan's sentencing sent shockwaves through the community. His crimes made headlines, and the bank issued a public apology for its oversight. Patricia, his mother, moved away, likely out of embarrassment. Part of me wanted to confront her, but I realized it wasn't worth my energy. My focus was better spent on myself and my future. One evening, Daniel and I went out to celebrate at a small Italian restaurant. As we clinked glasses, he raised a toast. "To your freedom." "To my freedom," I echoed, smiling, a genuine smile from a place of peace. Looking back now, I see how far I've come. What happened to me was horrific, but it didn't break me. It taught me that I deserve better, that I have a voice, and that no matter how dark things seem, there's always a way out. Jonathan underestimated me. He underestimated my strength. Now, as I look ahead, I know one thing for certain: I'm free to live, to dream, and to build a life on my own terms. That, to me, is the greatest victory of all.